Everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. You will notice that I am not the usual chairman, but we'll cover that with agenda item. Any apologies for absence?
Apologies from Catherine Glover, and Lou Timlin is substitute, and apologies from Dave Edmonds, and George Evans is here to substitute.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We'll move through the agenda. Next item is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of November, which does seem an awfully long time ago. Any comments or observations from that? If not, can I have a show of hands to approve? I don't see any to the contrary. Thank you very much. Next item is declarations of interest. Does any member have any items to declare, any interest declaring any of the items on the agenda this evening? Going to look that as a no. If usual rules apply, if anyone discovers they have an interest, please declare it at the first possible opportunity. Next items together, public question time and member question time. Good evening, Paul.
No questions of either denomination received, Chair.
I was made aware of a question from a member that relates to one of the items on the agenda this evening. It was received about an hour too late for it to be printed in the pack, but it's a relevant question for tonight, which will come up regardless. And as Councillor Newton has made the effort to be here this evening, would I be able to claim members' indulgence to allow the verbal question? We won't answer it now, but we will pick that up as part of the discussion later on. Anyone object? No. Stephen, do you want to ask your question? And then, as I say, we won't answer it now, but we'll pick it up and deal with it in the relevant topic.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee. My apologies for this question was submitted slightly late. My question relates to item 53 of your agenda, WBC Future Headquarters Provision. Prior to being elected as a councillor, I had a career in facilities management and procurement in the corporate property arena. Now, clearly the role of overview and scrutiny within the local authority is vital. However, the council also has a duty, and residents will have a reasonable expectation that the council seek to make appropriate decisions and achieve value for money on their behalf. Therefore, can I ask all councillors to take great care when it comes to discussing commercially sensitive matters, recommendations and decisions in any public arena, as this could significantly compromise the ability to negotiate best value, whether that be in the procurement or potential disposal of assets. Further, may I ask the committee to give serious consideration to recommending to the executive not to rule out the leasing option at this stage. Many organisations lease their offices, as unlike residential property, usage and needs change, plant needs replacing over time, and building standards change. Leasing can avoid tying up significant capital and can be particularly helpful where there might be long-term uncertainty over future requirements, as it provides greater flexibility. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for those comments. I think I've now got the right microphone. Have I got the right microphone? Looks like I have. Thanks for that. We won't answer that now, but we'll make sure that's covered off in the discussion on the relevant agenda item. Right. Next item on the agenda is constitution update. And this is really just to look at to scrutinise chapter 7, which relates to overview and scrutiny of the proposed new council constitution. I'm looking around the table at who is going to be introducing this from. Excellent.
Thank you, Chair. I will keep it brief because I'm conscious there's a lot of business on the agenda this evening. So really, what we've tried to do with this chapter is in keeping with the entire review of the Constitution. So hopefully, what you have before you now is a streamlined chapter with much of the repetition reduced, the duplication taken out. There are the changes are set out on pages 12 and 13, the key changes, so that you can see those there. We have got Ed Hammond from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, who's going to help with answering any questions. So thank you for joining us, Ed, who's is Deputy Chief Exec at the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. So I won't say too much more, but if you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer those.
Just before I go to Pauline, Ed, is there anything you'd like to say? Oh, and welcome to the meeting. I would apologise, I was looking around the room. Is there anything you'd like to say at this stage, or are we happy just to move straight to questions?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing at this stage. Happy to, through you, move to questions.
Great, thank you. Pauline, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Ed and Priya and also the people who are drafting this report for taking into account some of the suggested changes that were proposed before this actually was published. So thank you for that. I've got two continued problems with this and probably a question. The first one, I think, is a bit of clarity is needed on item 1. Whilst I don't have a problem with deputy executive councillors being on scrutiny, I think it'd be very bad practice that we're on scrutiny in the area that they are deputy executive members for. So if we could add that to that number 1 recommendation, I certainly would be happy to support it. The audit committee one is well overdue. I've been wanting that for years. The next one is the minority reports provision. I think a vote. Firstly, I think the key point to make is that we don't exactly have very many minority reports. I can only remember 1. There might have been 2, I don't know, but certainly not many in my time on scrutiny. And that was on the changes in the boundary recommendations. And there was a minority report that suggested that it would be good to have single member wards in areas where the population are discrete and are better represented like that, rather than being merged with the town and losing their identity. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a political point at all. And I think if you only have an objection to a vote recorded, you lose the opportunity to feed back to the executive the logic for the vote against. And I don't see why minority reports are a problem unless they're happening all the time, which they aren't. I would say to stop having minority reports from whatever group would actually damage scrutiny and damage the ability to have alternative viewpoints within scrutiny from particular groups of councillors. So I don't think it's necessarily political. I mean, that one certainly wasn't. It's more to do with differences of opinion. And I think it's really important, if you want to value scrutiny, to be able to state more different views than just the one that gets the majority support. As long as it's not taken advantage of. You know, if you do it every time, then that would be ridiculous. And the other question was about the church co-opted members. I understand that they're only from what would probably be called Christian religions, and only a subset of those. I understand it's set by legislation, but it does strike me that in today's environment, where we have a lot of different religions in this association, in this council, or in this area, it seems a bit unfair that your Catholic and Protestant representatives get a say, but Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, etc., don't. So it seems to me that needs a review, and it probably needs a review at government rather than here. But I think that's something we should ask to look into, because it isn't fair, I think, not to let everybody have a say. Given that, I think it's very important that that's restricted just to matters that are related to education. And I certainly do not want elected councillors overruled and outnumbered by multiple faith representatives either. So we need to be careful about that. But I think it'd be good to look at that if that would be possible.
Okay. So on the 3 point, I was trying to go to the right page in the report. Can you just go over the comment that before I go to Ed and Priya, just the comment that you made about deputy executive members, just so we're clear?
Yeah, it's simply that if you're, for instance, deputy executive member for highways and transport, I don't think you should be scrutinising highways and transport items. So by all means go on HOSC, by all means go on children's services, but don't go on community and corporate if that covers highways, because you spent your whole life, presumably, helping formulate the things. You're not going to do a very good job of scrutinising them if it's like marking your own homework, really. So regardless of whether they've got a vote or not, I think that would be a bad practice.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify because it's a sticky area because we don't have any currently, but I think my view would also be not having deputy executives if we have them sit on the scrutiny for the portfolio area that they have responsibility for. Ed, do you want to pick up on, I'm not sure which way to look for the comments on the 3 points that have been raised by Pauline so far?
Shall I start, Ed, and then perhaps if you want to come in? We've had we've certainly had conversations about the deputy exec members with head of legal Neil Allen, and some similar concerns coming out there that whilst it's permitted to have deputy exec members sitting on scrutiny because they don't have decision-making power, perhaps it would be prudent for them not to scrutinise the areas which they potentially could be quite heavily involved in the executive side. So I think that's a very fair point, and we can certainly take that back to CRWG and then onwards to council as that progresses. In terms of minority reports, I don't know if Ed, you want to add anything on that? I guess it is a matter for members to decide. We've put out kind of the advice and kind of given you the what's out there. In the end, it'll be for members to decide what you wish to do with that. Again, we can put forward your views to CRWG on that. And then the church reps, you're exactly right, Pauline. It is set out in legislation. It's very prescriptive. They have voting rights on education matters, only on the Children's ONS committee. So there is little room, but it would be a government level review for there to be any changes to that. Hopefully I've covered most of your points. I don't know if you want to add anything, Ed.
Thank you, Priya, and through you, Chair. I just to sort of perhaps expand slightly on the minority report sort of point, and thanks to Councillor Jorgensen for having notified to us that issue beforehand, because it's allowed me to think of a considered response to it. I do agree, and I think on reflection, the way that I've perhaps expressed it in the recommendation to you is rather overly expansive. I think our approach as an organisation has always been that minority reports tend to have a tendency often sort of undermine the wider process, because scrutiny is meant to be something which is developed and concluded through consensus. And the presence of minority reports really demonstrates, in our view, a kind of failure of that process, because you're not able to arrive at a considered opinion that all members have reached. However, I think it would be, I agree, unreasonable to kind of fetter the ability of members to disagree in exceptional circumstances to a majority view, and I think it would be an unreasonable restriction. I think certainly when, as you're describing, the use of minority reports is extremely rare, I think maintaining provision for them under those exceptional circumstances, actually on reflection, is probably reasonable. The only caveat I would put on that is that it shouldn't undermine the need, I think, for scrutiny to try wherever possible to reach consensus on those matters, because there should be a recognition that where minority reports end up being drafted and issued, it does undermine the power and validity of the associated majority report. So I think that's an important caveat. But as a matter of general principle, I Councillor Jorgensen, fully accept the point and the criticism that you make of it. In relation to the co-option point, I know that some other councils have made separate provision for co-option of representatives from other faith groups, and that on occasion has been done through liaison with SACRE. I have to say I'm not completely across whether it's possible legally to make arrangements for those people, for those co-optees to hold voting rights. I'm pretty sure it isn't, and as Priya has said, it will require a change at national level to allow arrangements to be made to provide voting rights to those people. It does introduce an element of additional complexity, and obviously, I suppose the current arrangements reflect the fact that these co-option arrangements are now very nearly 30 years old, and I think the way that they're managed and the way that they're set out in legislation, I think looks increasingly unfit for purpose for local authorities' current needs. That obviously is rather above my pay grade, but I appreciate that the situation isn't necessarily adequate in the way that it reflects the wider variety of faith groups that you'll have in place. Those are the only sort of additions that I wanted to make to the point that Priya made.
I just on the point on the co-option, it's not obviously something we can't have the ability to change here. I know from work with the LGA, other scrutiny groups have used their SACRE committee as it relates to education to collect views, and then those are voted by the appointed representatives. I just wonder whether actually through SACRE that something would be possible, but I'm not sure we'll be able to get it, because otherwise we can't change who we can co-opt. Andrew first, then Beth, and then Shahid.
I should maybe make the point that at the moment on children's services, we don't actually have Church of England and Catholic reps. From my experience, we haven't had a Catholic rep for well, I say my experience, I haven't been on the council long, but I don't think there was a Church of England rep for a while, which was sorry, Richard Langley, but obviously he's left. And I guess following the discussion, I raised similar points to you. Actually, I think it is a bit of a sort of archaic thing, and it doesn't sit completely comfortably with me that it's a fair thing or maybe a necessary thing for the board. So I guess where I'm coming from, I'm not going to be rushing to try and co-opt people from that area. I guess because I don't I suspect those bodies have the right to sort of put people forward, and we would accept them if we wanted to. But at the moment, those positions are vacant, and it doesn't look like there's many people wanting to fill them at the moment. So that's just the situation where it is. But yeah.
I completely agree that it is really unfair in a modern Britain to have just one person or one person from two major faiths, both based on Christianity. And I, as Vice Chairman of SACRE, I am prepared to take it to SACRE to get a view, if that's the will of this committee. My personal feeling is, and as an active Christian and a good Methodist, I don't like saying this, I don't see the role of religion in children's services politically today.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think possibly where it's come from is the role of Church of England and Catholic schools and things, and I suspect that's where it's come from. But I agree. I don't necessarily think that there's necessary input onto that committee. But yeah,
Holly.
Somebody who's been on that particular scrutiny committee can help me, but I've been in the middle of a bit of a heated discussion between various different groups on SACRE who didn't agree with each other and couldn't agree with each other on religious grounds. There wasn't unreasonable discussion. It was a deeply felt feeling, but it's not right to get one group to represent another group. That's never going to work in some cases. And I was particularly interested in the impact on the curriculum. I don't know how much children's services scrutiny gets involved in the curriculum. Yeah, I think that's the area where there's likely to be interest, and that's the area where you will get varied views. So maybe we can find a way of adjusting this so that you get the reviews from SACRE from the individual reps rather than just from somebody trying to represent somebody else they might not agree with, which would be very difficult. To come back to the question on minority reports, I mean, maybe we could change the wording so it says minority reports will not be encouraged, but are allowed in exceptional circumstances or something like that, to try and discourage them. Because I agree, we don't want minority reports all over the place, but I think there is a place for allowing them if you want to try and explain a different point of view.
So before I go to Beth and Shahid, so we can probably close that one off. I also think that we can do something with the wording of that particular recommendation. I was trying to rack my brains about how many times I've seen a minority report in my life. And I think it literally is. And the reason why I'm still stuck on it is because in another place, that minority report came in via the boundary review group as opposed to a script. But that's the only chance I can ever remember is the very valid case of differing views on where boundaries should sit.
I think, sorry, Chairman, to come back on that, I think that's exactly the reason why it shouldn't be a problem in exceptional circumstances. It's not being misused. They're not being used all over the place. We usually come to an agreement, or we come to a voted agreement where one side gets more votes than the other, but that doesn't matter. And we do quite often vote cross-party along here as well. But I think the important thing is to leave that opportunity open in exceptional circumstances.
So can I suggest then, is anyone disagreeing with that principle of minority reports? So in which case, if I'm not seeing any hands go up to object, can I suggest that we, rather than try and bash out what wording might be acceptable or not, just work this through offline collectively, and then feed that back into the process to be added back into the final recommendations going through to full council. But I think we're all in agreement with what we're saying. We shouldn't have minority reports for absolutely everything. It should be in exceptional circumstances, but we shouldn't also rule them out. And then just before I come back to the third topic of co-option, on the first topic of deputy executive members, I think the view I'm hearing is that we're in agreement that deputy executive members, if they are appointed, can sit on scrutiny, but just not on the scrutiny committee for which they are a deputy, which they have portfolio responsibility. Great, no one objecting to that. So if that can be written up as part of the feedback, and then just finalising on the co-option, bearing in mind we can't change who we co-opt with the legislation. I've got a question from Beth and then Shahid, and then we'll see if we can pull that together. So Beth.
If I could suggest that we do a sort of similar thing with diocesan co-option. The Sacre had just been through a fairly bloody battle to set the lessons for schools this year. I don't think we're up to fighting another battle yet. I'm sure Shahid agrees with me that it wasn't a very pleasant experience, and that we just let that go for now and do nothing at all about it.
I think that's broadly the gist, I believe, of what Andrew was saying in some words. Shahid first, and then Pauline, and then I'll just come back to Andrew to make sure he's okay with that, and then we'll wrap that bit up. Shahid.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points. One point I was going to make was I think Beth is made in the same lines. We had a difficult discussions in the Sacre, which was a curriculum, and and it was very heated, very emotional debates. But nevertheless, we got an agreement as a collective group. So I do feel there's a forum if something needs to be discussed across so temporarily we can actually use that as a forum to agree across multi-faith group representatives. So that's an avenue which is all available, platform which is available, which I think we probably can use if we need to. Also, second point is that we do recognize that it doesn't reflect the modern day Britain as it is, right? But should we not, as a council, put forward our suggestion as well to the local government or the senior level that this is a concern, should be looked at? I recognize it's not going to happen soon, right? But at least they are aware that it's a concern at the local level. And if other councils do the same as well, perhaps that could be addressed at the higher level.
I think I might defer to Andrew on his views about that, and there's maybe a mechanism, but I don't think this is the mechanism for doing it. If everyone is okay, I think, Andrew, that would be more of a children's services piece to pick up elsewhere, maybe about writing to a minister about it. But I'm not 100% sure. And then Beth had a question as well. Sorry, Pauline had a question as well.
Yeah, I mean, I probably do think actually, it probably is a constitutional thing, really. If we, I mean, I know if we want this changed nationally, but I don't know whether it would be a children's. I think probably actually, if we wanted as a council to change it, I think it probably.
Sorry, just maybe I didn't make my
Yeah.
I didn't meant as a children's services. I mean, as a council, as a recommendation, that is something which needs to be considered. So that's what I was saying, not for any particular committee as such.
My apologies. I misunderstood the route to the question. So apologies. I would think I would support that as well. It doesn't represent modern day Britain in any way. I too have served for a number of years on SACRE in the past, and it's a very interesting group of very different, diverse religious views. I enjoyed my time sitting on SACRE. I personally learned a lot from it. Pauline.
And Shahid has covered what I was going to recommend, which was that we write to the government and point out the anomaly and ask them to do something about it. We don't have to tell them the answer. We just give them the problem to sort out.
I'm just struggling slightly on the mechanism by which we would trigger that, whether we would ask the council to do it, whether literally, I don't know how we would make that work, how that needs to go through to write. I'm going to look at the leader of the council and the chief executive. But I would agree. Is anyone else?
I think I would be happy to write on behalf of the council, but I obviously want to make sure I had captured in what I write the range of possibilities we're considering. I mean, the discussion has, as I've listened to it, has been very interesting. Part of it is about getting a fuller representation for all religious groups, but part of it is also about maybe this isn't a place for religious groups to be present at all. I have to say, if we're talking about modern Britain, my inclination would be towards that second option, not the first. And it is, as Andrew said, an entirely historic connection that really has led to the Church of England, Protestant nonconformity and Catholicism being represented, because they ran schools prior to the education reforms in the late 19th, 20th century.
Pauline, then on to Andrew, and I think we can move on.
That's why I suggested that we write to them and point out the anomaly, then let them consult properly and come up with a solution.
Indeed, and I think we could suggest that either if there is to be religious representation, it has to be broad and reflective of modern Britain, or if there is not to be religious representation, that may also be an acceptable way forward. But the status quo is not acceptable.
Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the other points. I think I would fall more in favour of the first option, where actually I think where it comes to scrutiny, no religious representation, I think would be. I think there's the SACRE forum, which, if necessary, could feed into things. I don't, as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been that much overlap of it so far, because I think it's slightly separate topics that are discussed. But should there be overlap, I think SACRE would be the forum for that to feed into children's services if it needed to. But my view personally, if we were going to write a letter, would be to be in favour of no religious representation, because otherwise we could be in a situation where, if we're making it even, that we might then have 5 or 6 religious representatives on children's services, and I think at that stage that's not what I think we want from that.
Mary-Louise.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I recall that I think it was the National Secular Society attempted to push through in Scotland a similar, and it sort of fell on some quite heavy constitutional issues to do with, I think it was the same set of laws that involve bishops being in the House of Lords. And, similarly, we might have the same opinion about that, but so that there are some quite serious constitutional issues that maybe we should understand before we move forward, because I mean I think the National Secular Society tried quite hard, and as far as I understand it, it didn't work. But clearly not, since they're still the law is still standing. So I think we would need to understand a bit more. But absolutely, my preference would also be for no co-option of purely on the grounds of their position within a certain organised religion.
Before I go to Shahid, Ed, Susan first. Do you want to go first? And then Ed?
Thanks very much. Just to add to that point about understanding more, I wonder if we should go to the local government association as well to garner their view, because they'll have a sort of a rounded view about what's happening in the country as well.
Thank you. That's an excellent recommendation. Ed.
Yes, not to prolong this necessarily, but just to share some of our sort of views. I mean, this is something that we've felt about sort of relatively strongly about for some time. I've had conversations in the not too distant past with civil servants from the Department for Education, which is the department that owns this as an issue, as opposed to MHCLG. It's my understanding is that this originally derives from when these co-optees were expected to sit on what were then schools organisation committees at councils, and they were meant to represent the organisations, dioceses, which run and ran voluntary aided schools. So it wasn't specifically connected to religious representation. It was about representation of dioceses being institutions that were doing a lot of work in education with regard to the voluntary aid status of the schools for which they held responsibility. I've talked to civil servants about this and about removing this in some way. I at the time when I've talked to civil servants about it, and I've done it on 2 or 3 occasions in the last decade or so, it's been said to me that while I think government at the time would not have been particularly bothered either way, what was said to me was that they felt that the bishops in the House of Lords wouldn't stand for it and would resist quite strongly the idea of removing diocesan representatives. So why it's so urgently important to them, I'm not quite sure. But obviously, public policy changes and circumstances change. It's with new government in place, it might be a spur to us and organisations like the LGA to restart conversations with government, particularly with a sort of local government related bill about to be introduced in the Commons. There might be an opportunity to effect change on here, because it is one of these small bugbears about the operation of some aspect of the scrutiny process, that if we are talking to government about making wider changes to scrutiny, as we perhaps are, there might be an opportunity to make changes here as well. So it could be that there is an opportunity here to affect that change. So yeah.
Thank you, Ed. Stephen.
Just to say that I think Scotland is different, and it's actually, I think, the Act of Union that prohibits the new United Kingdom Parliament, as it was then, from legislating to change the religious system and the law of Scotland. It's the only fundamental law in the whole English Constitution. Parliament is not sovereign. It cannot change the laws or the religion of Scotland.
I think we've all learned something. Yeah, it's great, isn't it? I think we've all learned something important tonight. Thank you. Shahid, did you have a comment? If not, I'll wrap this up.
Yeah, I think without prolonging this, I think we're not going to solve it. It's not for us to solve, basically. But the view I was saying that local government, I think, which Susan said, is probably the right forum. I'm sure they must have heard probably views from other across the country as well. And then they can, if you hear there's a strong feeling there, they can actually raise it at the central level. But obviously, people different here, they have different views, even the issues which you got, right? Whether a city, whether, even the space that, it should be no religious influence at all in the curriculum, that itself is debatable, and I'm sure people. That's why the law hasn't changed, right? So so yeah, yeah,
definitely one we're not going to resolve tonight. Going to move forward in the interest of time. So I'd like to thank all of the work that's gone in, echoing comments that Pauline made. This is some overdue changes, and here some great tidying up. So I think just to summarise the changes that we'd like to feed back to the process is on the membership of overview and scrutiny for deputy executive members, that they shouldn't sit on the portfolio scrutiny committee for where they have portfolio responsibility. That there are under item 5, we're going to do some offline work to come up with an alternate version of allowing minority reports in exceptional circumstances. I would just have to do that offline within a timescale. And then the third point is under where it says item 7 is the statutory diocesan church cooperative members, that we accept the change because it's providing clarity on voting rights relating to education matters, and that as a separate recommendation, I guess this would be through the chief executive initially with the LGA, that we need to write to relevant ministers in the right way. I'm being deliberately vague in my choice of words because I think we need to define what we want to try and say, but that we communicate with others to raise the topics that are being discussed here and will be clarified by people on email afterwards, if everyone is okay with that. Because effectively item 7 is just the change for the clarity on voting rights. Is everyone okay with those changes and recommendations? Ed, on behalf of us all, can I thank you for all the work you've done in this? It helps to move the cause of scrutiny forward, and I think that's a very great thing to have. So I'd like to thank you for all the work you've done. Thank you to Freya and all the officers that have been involved, and thank you to colleagues for all of the input tonight on that and all of the input offline. I think it's been a very useful debate. Ed, you're more than welcome to stay on. I say this to everyone that turns up. It's a long agenda, but you are very welcome. I'm sorry, Alison.
I'm over a bit.
Can I just ask, did CRWG only examine Chapter 7, Overview and Scrutiny, in their review of the Constitution, or is it that the changes to Chapter 7 are only being scrutinised?
Yeah, so it's an entire review of the whole Constitution. We've brought Chapter 7 here for the Management Committee, so we have done a whole exercise, and the whole Constitution will come before Council in the upcoming months to be approved.
So who will be scrutinising the other chapters changes before they go to Council?
So CRWG has been going through chapter by chapter. CRWG is made up of all the group leaders, so they in effect are, sorry Pauline, it's a cross-party group, so there should be that kind of feedback to the groups from the members of CRWG. So there's representation from each group on CRWG, so in effect there should be that kind of feedback mechanism for the rest of the members to see each chapter kind of developing.
So they are able to share with all councillors the proposals well in advance of the council meeting?
Yeah, so
we will all be sent them, will we? So we've got enough adequate time rather than a week before for us to examine them.
So Peter Harper sits on CRWG for the Conservative group, so he will have been involved in the review of each chapter, and we will look at how what more we need to do before we bring it to council as a whole.
Pauline.
Judging by this set of recommendations, I'd like to see more coming here, because I'm not sure if that's been through CRWG. They missed a couple of howlers in terms of issues that I think should have been picked up. It didn't take a rocket science to notice it, because I did. So I'd like to see more of the contentious issues. I don't want to see the change of punctuation and that sort of stuff, or the summarisation of stuff. That's fine, but I think where you're fundamentally changing policy, I'd like to see more of it here, to be honest. So you can have a decent discussion on it. You can't get a decent discussion in full council.
I mean, I can take that back. It is obviously a huge, a humongous document. So the way we've had the cross-party group has given us the chance to kind of work through it very at pace. So I can definitely take that back and speak to Andrew and others and see what can be done. I guess it's the review now has taken up to 12 months. So just looking about how we time this now, if we bring it back to scrutiny.
Yeah, and I'll go to Steve.
So what made you bring this bit rather than any other bit?
Isn't it rather obvious? It relates to overview and scrutiny. That's indeed it isn't, and that was the logic of bringing this chapter to this committee, that it relates to the functions of overview and scrutiny, where you have a special interest and special expertise and knowledge. So we need to draw on that. But if we brought every single chapter to this committee, I fear this review of the Constitution will be going on long after maybe the council even exists. So I really think we should be wary about bogging ourselves down too much. I mean, we do have a mechanism through the cross-party representation for every political group to be updated on what's going on. And I think we should rely on that for the most part. But where there is specialist material, like the chapter on the functioning of overview and scrutiny, we made a decision very early on that it was right and proper that overview and scrutiny should tell us what they thought would be the proper arrangements for overview and scrutiny. And that is exactly what we've been honouring.
Pauline, then we'll move on.
Yeah, so I don't disagree with you. You can't bring it all here. That's absolutely true. I'm just trying to pick the contentious things that might then cause a problem, because you cannot have a decent discussion on things like that at full council. It just doesn't happen. So as a compromise, could we potentially have the new version of the Constitution with changes marked, so that we can actually see where the significant changes are, and then we can read it ourselves?
But that is, you can do that already, because you should be able to share. Peter should share with you all the papers, and you can have a look and decide whether you want to address something through Peter and bring. That's the whole point of this. It is a constitutional review working group. It's in charge with working on the review of the Constitution. If we take over doing that from them, there's absolutely no point in having that group.
No, but I think some of these things require a few more brains on them. So well, I just like to be able to understand what the changes are. To be fair, I've asked for it with change marks before. I can
assure you, Peter's got the brains for the job, and he does a perfectly good job in representing the views of the Conservative group. And he takes back issues, as far as I know, and he certainly raises concerns with us, which we then discuss. But we either have a constitutional review working group, or we don't. We delegate the whole task of redrafting the Constitution to overview and scrutiny, which doesn't seem a sensible use of overview and scrutiny's time.
I'm just nervous of.
Don't forget, what's a contentious issue to you won't necessarily be a contentious issue to everyone. Trying to pick out what the contentious issues are is in itself an extremely difficult task.
Well, I think tonight we managed to find 3 contentious issues that everybody agreed were contentious, regardless of party.
I say you showed an admirable ability to demonstrate they weren't that contentious, because you've dealt with them very effectively.
But if we hadn't dealt with them, they would have been wrong, I think. That's the point.
Sorry, just to be clear, we find ourselves that we have a working group that's set up and tasked by all the political groups to review the Constitution of the Council, of which all 3 groups are represented. And all 3 should be feeding those comments back to each political group for discussion, review, thoughts, feedback back into that working group. And the reason this is here is because it relates specifically to scrutiny, and it's the whole range of the whole chapter that we've got a chance to have a look at. But I having done 3 or 4 constitution review groups, I think that the way it works is the correct way of setting it up. It is set up with political representation from each of the groups. The comments are discussed, fed back. There's track change versions. I mean, that's Peter will have access to the documents of everything that's being discussed at the Constitution Review Working Group. So I said the first instance.
Chairman, I will take it offline with Peter.
Right, in which case, Ed, thank you very much. You are welcome to stay. If not, we will move on, if that's okay, and welcome Lou. And we'll now move on to the next agenda item, trying to keep us on some degree of track for time. The leader and chief executives reports. Who would like to go first? Or is it a double act?
I'm going to say a few words, and then it is going to be a double act. I'll say something, Susan will say something. So I think you've seen the slides in advance. I hope you've had a chance to look at them. So I'm not going to go through everything, but on the first slide, update on the challenges, I'm sure you're all very well aware of what the fundamental challenge is to the council, and that is financial. We know, and at the risk of sounding like a track record, we know that Wokingham Borough Council is the least well-funded council with its range of responsibilities in England per head of population, in terms of the amount of money, core revenue support it receives from central government. This year, that core support has actually gone down by £1 million. So we're in a somewhat worse position than we were, not a better position. Like all councils, obviously, there are certain costs associated with the budget that we're still coming, the national budget, that is, the autumn statement that we're still picking through. Still not entirely clear how much of that is going to be covered, but I suspect nowhere near all of it. And in the meantime, of course, the other thing that is, again, a constant, the demand and complexity of need continues to ride, especially in the key areas of adults and social care, but also in housing. And it is worth emphasising at this point that our situation financially is more challenging, and that £1 million loss of grant is a reflection of the new emphasis that's been put on allocating funding to local authorities based on indices of deprivation. Now, indices of deprivation are, of course, an extremely good indicator of need, but they're not an infallible indicator of need. And in fact, they miss very important needs, particularly with adults and children's social care. Those are not needs that are simply generated by lack of income. They're needs generated by disability. And we do need to accept that we have a bit of a battle to fight to try and persuade the government that it is making a mistake in assuming need and deprivation are exactly the same term. They're not. There is something that we need to say to them, and we need to keep saying to them, about how we have to be adequately funded to be able to recognise the true costs of delivering adults and children social care in particular. I don't know whether you want to add anything, Susan, on the challenges side, or before we go on to how we're trying to respond.
No, I can mainly come in on the response side.
Yeah. Do you want to go at it first?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the finance, if we think about the challenge that Stephen's just articulated around the finance, I think that what I really wanted to pull out is that to assure you that we are working corporately to address those particular challenges. So, for example, you may have heard about the care home that we've purchased. You've heard about the children's homes that have now got Ofsted accreditation. And also specialist accommodation. And I think it's to reinforce that we see these financial pressures as corporate pressures, as shared pressures, not as actually related to one department in particular, because it's really important that we take a whole council approach to those particular challenges. On the point of inequalities, as it says in the paper, becoming a Marmot borough is a real sort of priority for us, and that's about ensuring that we create the right conditions for people to thrive, for everyone to actually thrive, and becoming a Marmot borough is really about embedding that principle, and that's something that we're really working hard to do, is embed this point that we've got a lot to contribute as a council to how people can thrive, whether that's about the home they live in, having a job, the fact that they have an income, the fact that they can put food on the table. So there's a lot that we can contribute to this, and so we're really embedding that. Something that we're doing as well right now is really looking at the detail to understand where we really need to focus our efforts, i.e. to those that are in greatest need and at the moment have the worst outcomes. So for example, we've looked at smoking cessation, and we've really drilled down as to where we really need to focus our efforts in terms of particular streets and areas in the borough to actually really target those particular services around smoking cessation. Because if we looked at the average and what we do in this area, we do really well, but actually we know there are particular streets and areas where we need to focus our efforts. So that's what Marmot is about. I think, did you want to add it before I go on to partnerships, Stephen, the vision you might want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to just say, in many ways, Marmot is something we're doing already. It's about how you intervene early and try and prevent. And this is obviously not only improving the life chances and the quality of life of our residents, but also in the end saving us money, because it's effectively investing now through early intervention measures in things that will reduce the financial pressure on the council downstream. And I think that is immensely important. Have I got my downstreams and upstreams right, Graham? This is a perennial problem I have. I think it's downstream, yeah. Susan's going to talk about partnership working externally, but it's worth saying that another important thing that we're trying to do is ensure that the council works effectively as a partnership within the organisation. So we're trying to get the different departments of the council to work in a more corporate way, to recognise challenges and problems as corporate problems, not departmental or directorate problems. And we're trying to ensure we maximise the strength of the partnership between elected members and officers. So we are working together as a team to try and achieve the same objectives. So partnership starts at home, as well as being something we want to do with people outside the organisation.
And on that point about outside the organisation, you'll know that a community's vision came to council. And I think what's really powerful about the community's vision is that it's co-produced. You know, it's really been led on by our sort of like communities, by the voluntary and community sector, for example. That is really, really powerful. And I think thinking about the 6 ambitions that are part of that community's vision, it's all about inclusiveness, and that actually ties in very nicely with the Marmot Borough as well. So there's a real theme there about us actually really addressing inequalities and actually really working on that inclusiveness. So I would say as a borough, we're really getting into the granular sort of detail as to making ourselves a much more inclusive borough, and the vision, the community's vision, is really sort of part of that. And the partners that we work with, excuse me, are very much part of the solution in that as well, because it's about actually having the vision, but obviously it's about delivery as well. But how we work with our community and voluntary sectors is very much part of the solution. And we already do a lot of work with them, with our communities and voluntary sector, for example, around sort of tackling poverty. And this is further sort of work in that regard. I think that a second example in terms of partnership working is the partnership that we've got with Reading University as well, and it's a strategic partnership. It's something that we meet on a pretty regular basis with the Vice Chancellor and the leader chairing the meeting, which cuts across the council and the university. And so again, it's actually it's really important that whatever we do in partnership, it adds value, that these are not, they're not talking shops. We must add value through what we do. And there's often in these situations spin-offs as well, because of the relationships that we've built, because in terms of partnerships, relationships are really key, and trust. And so again, the vision, again, it's absolutely, not only will we've had that piece of work, but it's the partnerships we've created through that, and now those relationships and trust. And similarly with Reading University as well. And I think it was really interesting, maybe 6 months ago, I was at a conference, it was run by the civil service, and there were public sector organisations from across the board represented, including universities and others. And our partnership was cited as a good an example of good practice with Reading University. So it was nice to actually hear that.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the next slide, the national context, which is really just a reminder that despite all of these substantial challenges that we were outlining at the beginning, the ways we're trying to tackle them are producing external validation. Empower, which is a consultancy that assesses in particular the performance of councils, Empower in October 2024 published an index of councils. It was focusing on those councils like Wokingham that offer a range of services, including adults and children's social care, which, of course, as you know, accounts for more than 2/3 of our total spend. So it's a really big and important part of what we do. So they focus on those kind of councils, 150 odd of them, and they assess the top 10 in terms of productivity per pound spent. So in other words, outcomes achieved per pound spent. And we were in the top 10. We were number 5, which given all that's been said about our financial resources is a really significant accolade, I think. And we did well in pretty well every area that they assessed. I think what is really striking is that the analysis that Municipal Journal did of the Empower Index tried to assess what those top 10 councils had in common. And it identified 2 things, which I'm very pleased to say I think it certainly relates to us. First, a culture of thanking officers for the work they do, recognising the contribution of officers is absolutely fantastic and enormously important. Without that, we couldn't achieve anything. And secondly, a focus on working in partnership with others. Because quite obviously, if you're assessing outcomes per pound spent, everything you do that involves pooling resource, pooling experience, knowledge with others helps stretch those pounds further. So partnership working had a really big endorsement, I think, in the Empower Index. I think you wanted to add anything.
Just to add that we are really seeking to get underneath the data as well with Empower, so that we can understand how we can improve further, learn more, because we know we want to continually learn. So that's something we've had a presentation from Empower, but there's more to do, because there's a lot of data that sits behind this index that Empower have produced.
So on the next slide, making an impact, this is just some examples of things that have been done really during the 6 months since July 24. Just to pick out a couple, I'm sure Susan will have someone she wants to pick out. Solar Together relaunched to offer more residents a chance to sign up. That's a positive. It's worth saying the new waste collection regime has it's early days, and obviously we need to be slightly cautious, but so far it looks as though the recycling rates have been pushed up quite significantly, and I think that is a definite plus. We're going to be talking about social care futures in a minute, so we won't, I think, dwell on that any further. But Susan, other things?
Yes, I wanted to talk in particular about the fact that late last year we had the agreement that the former Workingham Library building in Denmark Street will become a hub for post-16 special education needs. And I think that, you know, where that fit, obviously it's a great project, but it fits really well with what I talked about a few moments ago about inclusiveness, and which was a key part of the community's vision. And also in the community's vision, it was very much around providing fair opportunities for everyone and opportunities for all. I think absolutely this hub is really sort of plays into that. Is a really important project for our, you know, for young adults.
Okay. Shall we move on then, just to look in a little bit more detail at social care futures, which I think is one of the really big initiatives this last period. As you know, it's not a Wokingham initiative. This is a national movement for change in the way in which councils interact with the users of their services, in particular users of social care services. And I'm sure you'll recall it's coming to council for approval. We have a fine picture there just to demonstrate that Pauline was there and Knives there and Adrian was there, and all sorts of people, and Beth, yes, there she is, right in the centre. And so, you want to carry on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, you know, it's so powerful. I know when the people with lived experience came to council and spoke, I know the hairs on the back of my neck sort of like stood on end. It was so powerful. And I think this point is that this vision that everyone should have the support they need to live the life that they want. And I think that the strap line, which is on this as part of the charter, which was 5 key changes to unlock a gloriously ordinary life, if I could say, you know, it's absolutely a fantastic strapline that the people with lived experience absolutely want. And this is about us, you know, true co-production, where we are working with people with lived experience, and also this, I think this charter and the way that we're doing this is all about actually how we talk about social care, and how we actually those that who we draw on for who draw on social care for support, how we engage with them. And it's actually changing the narrative to actually seeing the people with who've got sort of disabilities, physical or learning disabilities, seeing them as valuable rather than vulnerable. And I think that's really really powerful, and they prove that actually in terms of the presentation at full council. So I think it's a really exciting project to see the council sort of undertaking to have real change, I think, for people.
I think one of the things that I'm not sure it is reflected directly in the report, but one of the things that I feel particularly pleased about is we tried to demonstrate to social care future partners that, you know, the issues they raise, we are listening to and trying to address. And one that we, I think, have very successfully addressed is a request that we try to be more flexible in public transport options to enable disabled people to get to work opportunities. The bus passes that they were able to use really only kicked in after peak time, which meant that, you know, their opportunities to work were being limited. And I'm delighted to say that we've actually secured the money. We've voted through the money to extend the hours of operation of those bus passes to enable disabled users and their carers to take advantage of those bus passes over a much longer period, and to be able to get to and from work as a result of that. And that has a transforming effect, as you can imagine, on the lives of disabled people, to be able to feel they can work like everyone else, and they can contribute. And again, this is surely the key to inclusivity. It's not just about giving justice to those who lack it at the moment, but it's also about the benefit we all get from the talents within our community being realised. And I think that's, to me, the most wonderful thing about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think in terms of the 5 key changes that are mentioned here, Stephen's already talked about an example of action that's been taken. What we have in place are action groups where people with lived experience are part of the action groups. We're working together, and that's again to come up with further actions that address the priorities in the charter. So I think that will really take things forward. And another example is we're really working really closely between housing and social care to ensure that the accommodation is actually meets the needs of people with lived experience. It's the right accommodation that they can call home when we have that responsibility. So that's another example.
So the final slide is the inevitable next steps, and as you can see, most of this focuses on continuing to do what we have been doing, continuing to emphasise what we have been emphasising. So I won't go through all of that again. The last bullet point is the new one. It introduces the spectre of what hangs over us, the devolution white paper and potential changes to the structure of local government. I don't think this is a great occasion to have a long debate on that, but it is worth just saying that I don't envisage this being a rapidly completed piece of work. This is going to take a long, long time. And if we do come to the point of any changes in local authority boundaries, that would require the Boundary Commission to be involved. So we can anticipate this as a work of years, not months. So I don't think we should allow this to deflect us from carrying on doing the things we're doing. It's vitally important that we continue to deliver services to people in our borough that need those services. We continue to do what we have been doing. And I, for one, have no wish to be distracted and deflected by what may or may not happen. And I think it's important that we all try and keep focused on doing what we're doing and delivering for our residents.
Great. Thank you very much to both of you for the comprehensive update. Thank you. Pauline, I got the first question from you. Any other questions? Shahid next.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Thank you. It's almost shut me up. A comment and a question, actually. The comment is about the Social Care Futures Charter. I found it really useful. I had a resident contact me who was very dissatisfied with various elements of social care, and they were both a carer and a caregiver and a carer professionally. And I was able to contact Matt, who was really, really helpful, said, no, we want to hear what they say. We want to hear what they say, put them in the group to actually share feedback and to improve things. And it changed this person's attitude completely from being fed up because nobody was listening to them to actually being able to change their destiny. So I would like to thank the adult social care team in particular for their open-mindedness in, listening to people that have valid views of how services work or don't work.
Thank you for that, Pauline. I'm grateful, and I'm sure we will pass that on to all of those involved. But I think I may have met your resident because we had various sessions of social care future events where we've been round the table, and there was a lady and a carer from Early, and it may well have been the same one. And she was contributing very fully.
Well, that's great, because I think the best people to understand how care is best designed is the people who receive it and the people who provide it. And, that's they've got the most experience. Now, the question, I noticed you said that we had a cut of £1 million, £1 million in our budget. That's bad enough. I heard various noises about extra cost due to the minimum wage changes and the national insurance changes of £1.5 million to 3 million, something like that. I also heard that the government had said something about essentially making that good with some organisations? I think the NHS was singled as one of them. Have they made any indication that they're actually going to help us, who are fundamental in keeping people out of the NHS quite often, where this care is much more expensive? You know, have they made any approaches? Are we lobbying them? I mean, I think we are in danger of being forgotten in all this.
I don't think we're in danger of being forgotten. I've written so many times to the new local government minister, Jim McMahon, that we're on first name terms. No, I mean, he's a thoroughly decent and nice person who I think understands our predicament and would like to help. But so far, we haven't seen much evidence of what that help will mean. There are some ways in which the government clearly is trying to offer us more money, but unfortunately, that's largely to cover existing costs which have been imposed, or rather, sorry, new costs that have been imposed upon us. We certainly haven't got the cover of the costs that have been generated by increases in employers' national insurance contributions or minimum wage. That has not been fully covered off for us. We are lobbying. You're absolutely right, and we must continue to lobby. I think, as far as I'm aware, at this stage, the government's commitment to the NHS has meant that it's certainly trying to cover off the costs of the increases of both national minimum wage and employers' national insurance contribution for the NHS. But you make a good point in saying that adults and children's social care are vital to the NHS. If you have a well-resourced adult and children's social care system, that will save the NHS money in the long run. It reduces the pressure on the NHS budgets, and we have made this point repeatedly and will continue to make it, that it's in the interests of the NHS for there to be a properly funded social care system, because both in terms of reducing input and dealing with output from the NHS system, we have to have a proper adults and children's social care system, and we can't have it if it's not funded properly.
So has your new friend Jim said yes, or just not yet said no?
He's done what I have to say every local government minister I've ever written to, and there've been one or two of those now, have done, where expressed sympathy and shown understanding, but not yet shown action. But he's not the only person who makes the decisions on this matter.
Shahid.
I think we all know the adult social care is in crisis, whether we say it blatantly or not, right? And I see it as personally from my own experience as well. Obviously, being in the council, understanding how constraints are, but also for the last 2 years as a provider of the service as well, from the other side, which I do for the whole of Surrey County Council. But I see, honestly, the families are absolutely struggling with, that they are in tears in terms of what they have to do and the financial burden they have to face as a result of that. I think as a society, there's a big issue here. And actually, to be honestly, no political party wants to deal with this because it's a hot potato and we know what the problem is. And actually doesn't, the current government's sort of commissioning, setting up, and that doesn't give any comfort to any people at all. That's like pushing the ball in the long grass. We know what the problems are, but nobody wants to address them. There's no point having another commissions that they'll give you more or less the same outcome. But I'm just thinking that, in terms of we as a council, yes, we lobby the central government and we say, look, we need more funding. But is there anything else we are doing, perhaps, which could help us in this space? Maybe looking at different options, looking at maybe different technological solutions, perhaps, because that's one way to just wait until hopefully somebody will listen to us in central government. But are there any other options we are considering? Maybe there are, but I just want to sort of pose a question that what are those options which are being considered?
Well, one of the things that we have been trying to do, not simply in relation to adult social care, but in relation to the whole range of services the council provides, is, as I've already said, and we've emphasised quite a lot in this report, engage in fruitful partnership working, trying to extend partnership opportunities wherever possible. And in a world of constrained finances, and I don't see that world for us changing, we have to think about new ways of doing things, and partnership working, focusing more and more on partnership working and maximising the ability to work with others is part of the response. It has to be part of the response. Yes, we should lobby for more money. Yes, we should do all we can to present the case for adults and children's social care to be properly funded. But in the end, there is a massive public finance problem, which the government is trying to tackle, and we have to recognise that. So, and we are not going to be, I'm afraid, first call. It's very obvious that there are many other causes that are going to come higher in the list than we are. So it is incumbent upon us, and I think you're right, Shahid, to think about how we can do things more creatively. And I feel very strongly that the work we've put into partnership working is a way of helping to make our money go further. If I may just amplify that point just for a moment, and it's out of the area your question relates to, but the work with the University of Reading that Susan referred to in the slides on our report, that is bringing us an enormous number of benefits that wouldn't be immediately obvious to most people. But the University of Reading benefits from working with us. It's able to apply for and secure more grant funding on the basis of impacting on public policy. It's an enormous feather in their cap. So they know the value of working with us. And we are getting, as a result of that partnership, things at a much lower price, or no price at all in some cases, than we would have had to pay in different sets of circumstances. So forging partnerships, especially with other public bodies, we didn't mention in the partnership agenda the Berkshire Prosperity Board. That is a key way in which we can work with other people, the other Berkshire councils, to lever in government funding and private funding to help Berkshire as a whole and all the councils that are in it. So I would answer you by saying partnership working is absolutely key to this.
Sorry, can I come back on that?
If I can, I just want to add really, just if
Let Susan go first.
If that's okay. So with that, your point about adult social care and people in crisis, I'm thinking about the different examples of things that we're really sort of seeking to do to add to what Stephen has talked about. So, for example, the care home that we've purchased, we've had real issues around the cost of placement. So we've purchased a care home ourselves, and actually really good quality as well of care. So that's an example of the type of thing that we're doing. In terms of families that might be in crisis, we work with Citizens Advice so that we have almost like if I can call it a one-stop shop, one front door, so to ensure that families who are experiencing sort of real financial crisis can get the help and advice that they need. So that's an example. It's not going to solve everything, but it's an example of where we hope that we can provide different types of advice that families might need. And the newsletter that went out to all, the electronic newsletter that went out to all of our residents, I think it was a couple of days ago, really talked about that, the help that people can actually access. We work with, in terms of partnership, we've got the company Optilis. We're part of that company with Optilis, and that's all about actually trying to get as much value as we can and still provide great services. So one of the outcomes from Optilis is that we are the best council in the country to get people with learning disabilities and physical disabilities into work. So going back to that inclusiveness point, by working with companies like Oculus, that gives us a really good outcome. And then finally, the point I was going to make is that we were talking about Marmot a few minutes ago, and Marmot is all about actually getting those building blocks right and tackling health inequalities. So I think that will really help. It doesn't solve everything, but just to give you examples of the things that we're trying to do in this arena.
Okay, Shahid, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I think just coming back to the partnerships, I understand so where you're coming from, and Stephen as well. I think partnership, because I see it from actually the front line myself, right? And I've spoken to hundreds, probably out of hundreds in the last 2 years of people. So practical issues, for example, is that the council pushes to go to them in the care homes. That is the common things I've seen across most of the council. Because why? Because it's cheaper option for them council. So it's more of a economically led solution. But most of the people don't want to go to care homes. What I've come across, hundreds of them. I've spoken literally. I'm not sort of not 1,000, I would say, but in my last 2 years. But no one is looking at a solution. How can we provide a cost-effective way of giving them care in people's home where they feel very comfortable staying in their home and they don't want to go to care home? And so this is a practical one sort of thing, right? Secondly, to talk about partnerships, for example, as you know, hundreds and millions of pounds are being basically could be saved by the NHS if they work in partnership with suppliers as well. Why? Because the bed is occupied and they can't sort out the care. Therefore, that could be 5 days, that could be 10 days, and each night is costing them 500 to 600 pounds, and you multiply you can work out the numbers. So there is no partnership working there. Potentially, we could save hundreds of millions of pounds, and that saving could be maybe put to social health care. So partnership, yes, having a policy, that is one thing, but I'm talking about tangible, real things which make a difference in people's lives. That's what I'm talking about.
Susan.
Yeah. So I think if Matt were here, he really would actually come back to you and say, actually, we do want people to be in their home because that is the best place for them, and to have support around them in that home. And we were talking about that very same point in the health and wellbeing board the other day, and I would say his service, if you got Matt here, him and his team would talk very eloquently about what they're doing to enable that to happen, because that is absolutely key. And it's really interesting what you've said about as I'm not going to use exactly your words now, is that questioning whether we work in partnership about enabling people to come back to hospital into their home. The chief exec from the Royal Berks only a few days ago actually wanted to pass on the thanks to the team here about how the team here really helped in terms of moving people from the Royal Berks into their home at a real time of crisis that we've just seen in different hospitals around the country. And we really helped in avoiding a real crisis by working closely with them. So there's real examples of us working in partnership and getting improved outcomes.
Great. Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you. I just want to very briefly come back to, I think it was Pauline's point just a bit earlier. I know it's something slightly different, I think, on the national insurance thing. I think the government had announced just before Christmas that there was that mitigation of about 500 million or so, which I'm hoping the council will see a proportion.
You're absolutely right, Andrew. They did announce that. But the distribution of it is by the formula that they use to allocate the core revenue support, which means that we get virtually none. We get a tiny amount, and it's nowhere near enough to cover off on the increased costs. Other councils will get much more because they score highly on the indices of deprivation, because we don't. We are getting a much smaller amount than many others, or in fact, than say pretty well any others. So in our case, I'm afraid it's not actually going to help more than a tiny bit.
Great. I'm going to move us on in the interest of time, but thank you to Susan and Steve for the update. Look forward to receiving the next one. we're going to move now into the next agenda item, which is the Q2 24-25 performance report. Sorry. Yes. I couldn't work out which of those.
Yeah.
Sally was threatening to start and hand over to me, but I think it's actually probably better the other way around. I should start. Just to say a few brief words before handing over to Sally, who knows the data much better than I do. But you can see in the summary of the report on page 41 some of the highlights that are recorded there. And again, it is worth remembering the overall context that we face with continued challenges in terms of both funding, but also, a seemingly inexorable rise in need for the services that we provide. I think in general terms, the results here are encouraging, and they show in many specific areas improvements on Q1. So I think it's a generally positive picture. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Sally. The granular.
There'll be semi-granular now.
Yeah,
The real granular.
Yeah, mine is super high level because it's great.
I'm just kind of watching this get passed down at the same time as I'm watching Graham play musical chairs around the room as well.
So,
Sally.
thank you. So I'll start off as we do always with this report. This tonight is the detail across the council, but the specifics linked to adults, children's, public health. If there are any specific questions, obviously we can record those and pass those on to the relevant overview and scrutiny committees that would be able to have the representation from the officers who would have the detail that I certainly wouldn't have tonight. So starting off with that as the normal running of service. The other aspect is we're conscious that it's Q2 and there's a delay for all sorts of different reasons, but in the main due to the time when the report was published, and then obviously all of the breaks in between. So it's not normal that it comes this late, but it is reflective of the position as we were at that point in time. You'll very soon see Q3 coming through, and we'll be able to touch on tonight as myself, Graham and George as the directors for the relevant areas represented on some of the updates on the position as was at Q2. It would be really helpful, I think we did this last time, Chair, if we could cover off each directorate in turn rather than going back and forth. We find that really helpful. And again, I think the other aspect, if there's ever any questions that members would like a detailed response to anything you send through in advance, we would obviously collate those questions. But obviously we can take questions on the fly tonight. Thank you.
Is that now passing to Louise?
No, I think that's fine.
Yeah, where would you like to start?
I would say
I would tend to say let's start at the beginning. So we've got a typical covering report. That would be great. And thank you, RNA, Resources and Asset. For Graham, please.
Right, Adrian, and then Pauline.
Yeah, I've got a question on RA2, which I think is Graham. This 4.89% return, is that gross figure or is that the net figure?
Sorry, just to pause, page 50 of the pack. Little note to everyone, if you can tell us what page you're looking at.
Sorry.
Sorry.
It is page 50.
My apologies, I should have said that, Adrian, but if anyone is asking a question, anything, the reference number is really good, but the page number is faster.
Yeah, page 50.
On that calculation, there's a bit of sum. So this doesn't have the capital you find in of storage. Yeah, so it's, I'll get back more specifically. I know it doesn't have the capital financing costs of borrowing associated with it. But it will have all other sorts of running costs, and so there will be a net position in that regard, but it's not fully net because it doesn't have the capital financing costs.
Okay, and I presume these are kind of freeholds or something like that. Do we have any significant upcoming maintenance cycles that we're responsible for, or is there, you know, does the leaser have to maintain the buildings or whatever's on the site?
Yeah, well, they will all have certain agreements, and they may not be exactly the same. With some, you'll see in the capital programme, we do provide for some rather sizable repairs to roof and what have you to ensure we can re-let. But obviously in those leasing arrangements, there's responsibilities for those who have taken on that lease. Obviously, it's a balance between getting the best return from the rent versus the amount of responsibility that sits with the tenant.
And if I remember correctly, a number of years ago, the reporting was a bit more granular than this, looking at individual items in the portfolio. I seem to remember a report that went to full council a long time ago where we were looking at individual properties. Perhaps I'm mixing things up, but it's a very high level with no detail in this report.
You're absolutely right. This contains what's called all our commercial properties. So those were the properties we purchased under what was called initially the Property Investment Fund, become the Community Infrastructure Fund. And there is a list of those, and that's updated quarterly on the website, and it identifies each individual property that we acquired, and more detail than this against each individual property. What this is intended to do is show a much more, to illustrate or report on the fact that is just a segment of the overall holding that just happens to be the new ones we acquired under that new permission, and this brings into account the much broader holding. So behind all this will be a very detailed list of all the assets that we have and how this overall returns calculated in the context of already a very substantial KPI report. This is just one KPI of many. This was seen to be appropriate in the context of this report.
Thanks very much, Graham. You've answered all my questions. Pick up the same thing.
There may be a spelling error or a letter missing. Yes, we've seemed to have created a property investment fund.
Well, it has had its moment.
I can imagine. Pauline, thank you for that. Pauline.
That wasn't what I was going to ask about, but it did make me smile. Two questions, please, Graham. RA1, occupancy rate of WBC property portfolio. That's not the portfolio in RA2, is it? Is there any overlap?
Yes. Yes. I was looking to Sarah, who actually knows a lot more about this than I do, as you could probably tell. But yes, this is the same thing. These RA2 are the assets that we own, and obviously they need to be occupied in order to generate a return.
So if we look at the return at 4.89%, does that include the properties that are occupied but at peppercorn rents and all that sort of stuff? And if you took all those out, would that 4.89% be higher, or is it not the same property?
The the 4.89 is the actual calculation taking into account voids.
Accounts?
Yes.
So it's diluted, yeah? Is that right?
I think Sarah's.
I'll tell you what, I'll phone a friend. Oh, it's the chair here. That's all right.
That was it. That's it. That one.
Sorry, yeah, just to, so RA1 is the occupancy rates of our entire property portfolio. Historically, from up to last year, RA1 was a KPI that was focused just on the town centre regeneration units, and that was a hangover from obviously during the time of significant investment in the town centre. We were very focused on those. But what we wanted to do was actually expand our reporting on our property portfolio to take in all of our portfolio, because we own a significant number of properties outside of Wokingham town centre regeneration. So RA1 is our entire commercial property portfolio, and RA2 are the properties that we bought as under the property investment fund. So they form part of the portfolio and that's measured under RA1, but it's not the entirety.
So it isn't diluted?
No.
So RA1 includes things like the library or Rubra 1 and 2 or the Marks and Spencer's building?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
it would.
Thank you. That I understand. It would be interesting to know if you took into account all those other properties, what the return rate actually was. But I'm not asking you now because I think that might be a bit of a calculation.
Yes. So when we under RA1, we refer to our estate in two ways: the commercial portfolio and the corporate portfolio. The corporate portfolio are those buildings that are providing a council service, so libraries, care homes, schools, for example. The commercial portfolio are those that have tenants in that are paying.
So RA2, does it include disused libraries or not?
RA2, no.
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 So an RA1 does, yes.
No, because a disused library we would consider as part of our corporate, as our corporate estate, as in it's providing.
It seems to me like RA1 needs to cover everything that we've got, not just the things that we choose to cover. So if we've got disused buildings like disused libraries, like we have in Wokingham, that I know it's occupied, but as an example, then it should be counted in the occupancy rate of the property portfolio, because you've got an opportunity to do something with it. And if you're keeping everything to one side that you have got that used to be used and isn't used anymore and taking it out of RA1, that percentage is too high.
Well, just to come in on that, we didn't previously report on this at all. So this was a new KPI this year. What we certainly thought we would focus on more immediately was those that were income generating, which obviously had a bigger impact, certainly in our financial context, than those assets that weren't income. Yes.
So I think my point is that one of the key measure the things that are occupied. The occupancy is always going to be high, isn't it? Because otherwise they wouldn't generate any income. So if you're ignoring all the ones that aren't occupied, then that should be 100%, because if they're occupied, they're occupied, and if they're not occupied, not in these figures.
It's not only measuring those that are occupied. It's the 100% is those buildings that have an income generation potential, would have a tenant in with a lease, and out of that portfolio, 99% of those buildings are currently occupied.
Back to your disused library example, my disused library example, that has got an income generating potential. Why isn't it in here?
At this moment in time, that library is identified for service use. It's never had an income generating use identified for it. It's been a library and it's been empty and now occupied by a VCS whilst we decide what to do with it from a service point of view.
My personal view is that, to be transparent, we should also look at the things that are vacant that could be having something done with them but aren't, and they don't seem to appear in these stats. So maybe you could take it away and think about it. I understand you're improving the stats. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that you're sort of selecting or selective in your what's in and what's out, and it's not that clear.
Could I suggest that either we can look at the title of it to make sure we're clear as to what's in and what's out. The other thing is the new asset management plan will be coming forward through over in Scrutiny and to executive, and that has a lot more detail in there about the granular and our approach to how we deal with both our corporate stock, those that become vacant, etc. So I think that granular level of detail will also be in that public document as well.
Yeah, thank you, because I think what I'm interested in is the stuff that we could be making money out of that we're not, because it's empty, and that doesn't get covered in here, I don't think.
No, this was deliberately selective to focus on those more directly revenue generating properties. I understand the ask. We'd need to see how we go about introducing that, if we can.
One, perhaps corporate asset management.
It's something that would sit well with the corporate asset management discussion, because sometimes one would choose to deliberately hold properties vacant. And a good example, it leads into the HQ discussion. So in some ways, we're making deliberate approaches or actions to leave open or peppercorn, and therefore it can show maybe a disingenuous approach in terms of where we are, because the aim isn't to fill.
No, I think the key thing is that you understand the data and you're clear about why it is what it is. I don't think it needs to be 100%. I'm not complaining about that at all. I'm just saying it's very selective in what it's showing, and it's quite difficult to follow because the description doesn't actually tell you what it is.
Certainly we can look to improve the description here. I think that broader discussion and the whole suite of asset ownership and what we're intending to do with that will be best dealt with, as you said, Chair, under the asset management plan item that's coming to scrutiny.
Yeah, I'm not trying to redesign it here. And I had one other question, but other people might have questions on RA1 and 2. But the other question when we get to it is, I think I've asked it before actually, with RA8, if your information feed and information requests are within a statutory time frame, why isn't it target 100%? Presuming it's statutory.
Sorry. Yes. It's a fair point, and you'll see that the actual has moved to its headiest heights of 92%. It's fair to say it's not commonly achieved as 100% across all councils. So I think it will be better to have a target that we can realistically strive for, which at the moment wouldn't be 100%. But obviously the ultimate endeavour is to get as close to 100% as possible. And Q2 is, I believe, the highest it's ever been.
So given it's a statutory target and you're not meeting it and you're not aiming to meet it, what's the penalty? Is there no penalty at all? I'm struggling to remember, to be honest, because
I can't remember. I know, because I've been to this in other places, that it's, if you don't, then there's a tap on the wrist, the tap on the shoulder and slap on the wrist. But I can't remember if there's any financial penalties to doing it. I think the other thing also in this is that you've got the statutory number, and then we're tracking effectively against what 100% would be, and we're just falling short of it. But actually, it's falling between. We're not at 100%. But is that green or is that amber or is it red? And if it's not 100% are we red? I think there's still more work on how we define that one.
To be clear, I don't think 92% is a bad performance at all. But what I'd like to know is what the implication is of not hitting a statutory target, if any.
Some understanding of what the statute, we're aiming for 100%. What's the actual target that we have to hit? Is it 100% because that's the statutory number of responding to 100%, or actually is it less? But I think, can we pick that up for again the next one?
Yes, Chairman.
Any more on first section? Right, I'm going to move on. I'm just going to keep us moving because it's 8:45 and we still have a couple of large items to get through tonight. So I think we're going to George Mason-Gray. Over to you, sir.
Chairman, nothing to add to the report, but happy to answer any questions that members have.
Nice introduction. Any questions on this block of KPIs? I think yours is the only hand up so far. Pauline, would you like to go ahead?
I just wonder if you could give us a bit more colour into what's happening in the ASB service request space where it's red. So it looks like you're getting a lot more requests than you're targeting. Is that because you're getting...
Page 61.
Sorry, page 70.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the summary table.
Oh, I'm looking at page 70. So is that... So do you know why you're getting more requests than the target? Is it because we've got a big problem, or is it because we're getting multiple people raising requests that on the same subject in order to create noise, or what's going on?
So, yeah, you're right. More requests than previously targeted. What we've found is that there's been an increase in waste, as in people leaving things alongside bottle banks, leaving things alongside containers, packaging and so on, and also an increase in bulky items being dumped as well. So mattresses, furniture. There has been some increases in black bin bags as well being left aside, and we're closely monitoring all of that. Probably the most concerning, I think, is the bulky waste issue. So we'll continue to monitor that. We've served nearly 114, 115 fixed penalty notices since April on these kind of issues, and we'll continue to do that. But we're obviously monitoring these numbers as well. Any trends that we're picking up, for example, dumping around some of the bottle banks in Asda, for example, we're seeing if we can put signage up there, or we have put signage up, or using our cameras where we can as well. So taking action on those hotspots as well, Paul.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear about the fixed penalty notices. There's a particular hotspot in Shinfield that I get messages about every 2 weeks, and you've got one in Woodley, and I've seen a lot of black bags beside bins. So I'm very pleased that you're actually enforcing it. Would it be worth getting a bit more publicity out about when you actually do enforce it, so that people know that they are going to be nicked, whatever the fined, whatever the word is? Thank you.
I have to check, Pauline, in terms of the actual cost. Yeah.
Shahid.
Just a comment. This is figures on 61, 63 and 65 page. Obviously, we are overachieving our target significantly. So I'm just thinking, either we're super efficient, or we're setting our targets very low. So, for example, 74% of 61 and 50% was the target. And then on the last one, you got 64, 100%, but only target was 60. So normally we set the target has to be more ambitious, right? And if the targets are very low,
can you just give the page and the reference?
I said 61, 63, and 64.
Sorry, you're talking PG1.
PG1. 6.
Oh yes. I thought the chairman said mentioned the page numbers.
Page numbers first is great. PG references.
Okay, yeah. All right. Yeah, PG 1, 3, and 6.
I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think we can probably just address each one, and of course, where we are doing well, then we should be challenging ourselves as to whether we can do better. I think what's helpful in this, for example, PG1, you've got information about other councils in terms of benchmarking here as well. So, I think where it comes to the PG1 about households whose homelessness is being prevented, we are doing really well. I think that's benchmarked against other councils in terms of their actions, but it remains an incredibly difficult area. And you'll know from some of the conversations just this evening around housing shortage, the cost of housing, and the challenges around prevention in terms of homelessness. So I think that's one example where you could increase the target, but I think actually our officers are working incredibly hard in very challenging circumstances, and I think that celebrates, I think, how hard they are indeed working, and that's benchmarked against other councils, which kind of validates their hard work. I think I can pick up on some of the other ones. I think you mentioned PG3. Did you mention? I think.
Yeah.
So an interesting one. This is the planning appeals one. You look at quarter 2, 55%, quarter 1, 87%. Our target is 60%. So it does fluctuate. And you'll see that quarter 2, so just to be really clear, 11 appeals, 6 of those were won on appeal. That's basically the figures there. We just need to be mindful of the data behind that. And if you look to the data, you'll see that some of those appeals that were allowed were ones that were overturned by the planning committee when the officers were recommending refusal of those cases. So again, I think it's a really important statistic. The target at 60% is actually a national target as well, which all councils are benchmark and all councils report on. So I wouldn't want to change that target in that particular case.
And on that particular issue, Shahid, it's worth saying that we are at a moment in the process of the local plan that is going to almost inevitably mean a large number of applications, speculative applications, seeking to get in before the plan is finally adopted. So we're going to get a lot of these, and that puts pressure on those figures, because obviously the ones that are coming in, we have not been able to demonstrate a 5-year land supply since February 2022. So that puts us at a disadvantage in refusing applications that we may wish to refuse. And it certainly means that when we do refuse, we have a harder task to defend those refusals at appeal.
And I just come back to that. I mean, I get what you're saying, Stephen, and obviously I know it's a challenging situation, but generally, if I'm running an organization, if I'm meeting a target ambitious every time, right, that's just sets a question in my mark that actually the targets are very low. That's the way I would look at it. I know it's a national target, but maybe it is a challenge for some other organizations. But I'm just thinking that if we are meeting a target which is extremely at a high level and consistently, this is my perception, and obviously it could be different. Maybe we're not setting an ambitious target for us.
It is worth pointing out that in quarter 2 we're not meeting it. In quarter 2 we're not meeting it.
But most of the case, we are.
Thank you. Pauline.
Thank you. PG3, I was quite surprised. It's better than I expected it to be. So that's pretty good, I think. Is there any split on that to know how many of them are things that have been through the planning committee versus things that haven't? And is the success rate of officers better than the planning committee or worse?
I can answer that honestly, but not without some degree of embarrassment. The record of officers is far better. And the planning committee has refused things that it's much more difficult to sustain on appeal, especially if they've overturned officer recommendations. But officer recommendations are more likely to be in favour of approval at the moment, precisely because of the tilted balance challenge. So, this is a particular set of circumstances that may be influencing the figures, is what I'm trying to say. But generally speaking, it is the smaller, the minor applications as opposed to the majors where we're probably scoring well, and that's counterbalancing losing some of the majors. I would say that would be my impression. Is that scientifically along the right lines? Yeah, there we are.
George.
Just want to take us back to PG10, page 70, which was the ASB service request. George, do you think that, so I've had a few inquiries that I've put through on behalf of residents where there's been a third party through the RSLs that have to be engaged because there's antisocial behaviour in their domain, and there's a challenge between our team having to try and interface with their team. Is there anything we're doing there to try to improve? Because I've had a good experience with your team dealing with stuff where they've got control over it, but when we're having to talk to a third party, we're getting a bit stuck. And I've got one that's been rolling on a little bit, no fault of your guys, but what can be done? What is being done to try and get those third parties to do a little bit more?
Yeah, I guess just from in terms of control, when it's with it in our housing stock, we've got the tools in place and we can take immediate action. When we're working through a third party, of course, it's more complicated. I think our relationship with the RSLs in most cases is really strong. We have a partnership arrangement. Partnerships have been talked about this evening rather than just a transactional relationship. It's very much collaborative and understanding of their circumstances. Nevertheless, there is a communication, a chain of command that we need to go through to get those things actioned. I think where there are particular difficulties or sticking points, then very happy for that to come to me or to the service managers or service directors, and we can engage a bit more at perhaps a higher level to see if those channels can be unblocked, I guess, if there are particular examples, George. So I'm happy to pick those up where you've got them in your ward, if that helps.
Okay, that's good. And then I just wanted to take us to, I'm going backwards to PG6, which is the total household waste tons, page 65, which goes on to page 66. I'm actually looking at page 66 and reading the service narrative. You talk about the reason for not reaching or hitting the target in Q2. One of the reasons is these include the increased economic stability that enables the purchase of more products. I just wondered where that had come from, because I suppose that's probably not the experience of what we're talking about and what's out there. So, what data is that based on?
So there is, and historically there has always been trends in terms of waste management, with the overall amount of waste being collected and the economic prosperity of a certain area, and where we found that things are starting to stabilise, as is the case, broadly speaking here, not for all. We've been very clear that there are some communities that don't have the benefit of if like economic prosperity and access to higher paid jobs. But in the main, where we've got that level of prosperity, we do find that the overall waste tonnage does increase, and that's what we are finding here. So it's an ongoing trend that we've seen through various economic cycles, essentially, that overall waste tonnage does increase.
Any more? Alison.
Just looking at the same service narrative, I just wondered, George, it refers to the tonnage including waste, that residents take to the RE centre. Now, these are shared centres. How is it we know the amount deposited by a Woking resident and the amount deposited by Reading residents? I mean, we know how many of our residents book appointment, but somebody might have an enormous carful and somebody might have a small carful. I don't quite understand how you calculate it.
Yeah, I haven't been through the operation actually in terms of as a resident. You obviously, as you say, you book in a spot, your postcode is registered, and I imagine as part of that, your borough of origin is registered as well. How then it's then calculated in terms of overall waste? I'd have to ask RE3 to understand that.
So I think it's a dreadfully scientific calculation that takes a huge amount of time. But as I recall it, it's total tonnage divided by not by 3, but because you can work out where people come from. It's divided in ratios, and I think that's as scientific as it gets.
I'll find out, Chair, and share it with the committee.
Anyway. Any more other than keep us moving forward? Okay, brilliant. I think that means we're now on to the Chief Executive section, which in my pack is bottom of 77, but that could just be the formatting. 77, 78. Susan, do you have any add, or do we go straight? Oh, Sally.
Yeah, I'll pick that one up. Thank you.
Thank you. Go straight to questions.
Yeah, thank you. So, same for George. I'm comfortable to take any questions that members may have this evening.
Questions on this section? Pauline?
Sally, have you got any thoughts on the declining customer service experience, customer services team satisfaction, and customer satisfaction with the web measurements, and what we need to do about it?
definitely have some thoughts. So so obviously this is page number 81, 80 and 81. So I think it'd be fair to say that with any change, no matter how well managed and executed, you're going to have a level of customer dissatisfaction. We see that across the board in internal and external change programmes. This information was at the peak of when we were changing our waste services over. So it's actually about the change to the process rather than to the response from customer service or the team's support across the council. We're already through Q3 seeing or we saw through Q3 the satisfaction levels go back to where we would expect them to be. And I think it's just that recognition that when we do something that has such a massive change, you know, to practically every household in the borough, you're going to start to see a level of dissatisfaction. Unfortunately, it is just a part of the course. So
that does make sense. I'm surprised it goes as far as the website, but it's maybe there's just grumpy.
We've definitely seen it at the website because we actually don't just, you know, we've got the Smileys, the good metrics system. We've actually looked at the commentary that goes with it, and some of it's linked to just making sure we've got the right level of information on the website related to the changes which we did. So that's good.
Adrian.
I just wanted to follow up on that point. You know, from my perspective, when the change happened, I didn't see any downtime at all. I don't know if there was any downtime. I don't believe there was. And, you know, when I've been using the web pages, I haven't seen any performance issues. I know previously with the outdated portal, certain aspects of that were very performance slow, and I haven't seen that with the new portal. So I understand your comments completely about change, but actually I've seen it from my perspective in a wholly positive light.
If I can just come back on that one. So thank you, Adrian. That's a really good piece of feedback, and I'll take that to the team. We acknowledged, didn't we, when we transferred over from quite an old website into a new website, that it would be a process of iteration in relation to improvements. And I would say we haven't had the downtime that we saw previously, and actually we've been able to enhance some key areas linked to being able to residents being able to self-search around their own kind of bin collection dates, and also we've got some based on actually overview and scrutiny's feedback at the last meeting, we're doing a dedicated user experience review of the search function on the website. That activity is underway at the moment. So I'd just like to thank the committee because that has actually led to us working with our partners to understand areas for opportunity.
Just before I get to George, I've got one. CEX1, number of people registered on the Engage platform. It seems an oddly specific target number. That we seem to be just shy of. I not for an answer now, but we'd like to understand on Engage where that target comes from, and obviously measuring it is an easy one, but where we're targeting that number from. Is it percentage of the borough, etc.? Yeah, it's just an oddly specific, very, very specific number that we seem to have missed.
What I would say, thank you, Chair. I agree. I would love to be able to say that I can put my finger on that right now, but I can't. But I'll take that away and come back with a written answer. Thank you.
George.
You caught me on the same question, but I have another one on CEX1. It'd also be interesting to know if you're adding to it, and then if the answer is the target's a percentage of people, and the actual is everyone going on. Are people coming off, and are they coming off because they're leaving the borough? Are we keeping an eye on that? And maybe another one you can take away there. But I wanted to go just back on CX4, which is 82 customer satisfaction web. Reading the service narrative, you mentioned answering earlier about the waste, and I see here it also mentions California Crossroads. It'd be really interesting to know, I think, where there are really contentious issues like these two mentioned, what are the numbers of that's actually impacting the number of individual cases that are hitting it, that you can see, all right, well, we've got 400 things of these two, and that accounts for 50% of the response. I think it'd help us to understand, right, okay, those two things are really dragging it down. You see where I'm coming with that one?
I absolutely do. So one of the things we're able to do with GovMetrics is see where we get the feedback where it's non-specific on what page they were on when they made that feedback, which is really helpful. I would say typically when you look at web satisfaction in kind of old school world, you would just look at the numbers rather than the intelligence that comes underneath it. So we're doing work kind of across working with a number of other local authorities about how these measures are starting to become more granular than they are at the moment. What I would say is that GovMetrics helps us hugely because we can really start to drill into that satisfaction level. And I think, as I mentioned on the Pauline's question, we're looking just as hard at the narrative that runs with the GovMetrics rather than just a smiley face, because what you can't get from a smiley or an unhappy face is whether or not someone's unhappy with the decision or unhappy with what we would term the user experience. The user experience is within our gift to be able to update and amend, and obviously work with colleagues where we've got decisions that are causing dissatisfaction as well. So.
Why do we have the smileys then if we're not valuing the feedback they give us?
We definitely do value the feedback. So we use the GovMetrics smiley piece across all of our channels, and sometimes we get the feedback based on, for example, if there's a dissatisfaction with a response to a call, we might then use that to be able to work with the listen to the call. So we use that to be able to assess the quality of the calls coming into the contact centre and our response to that. Yeah, so it's our kind of generic across all of our channels, which we're really looking to roll out in across all of our channels, things like web chat, etc. So,
moving on. Okay, next is Children's Services, page 87, 88 onwards. Looking around the room, does anyone have any questions on this section? Obviously, this is covered by its own service area, scrutiny committee.
Yes, Chairman, that was what I was just going to say. Obviously, there's scrutiny committees for children and for adults, and ideally, these questions should be directed there.
And same would apply to 97 for adult services. Do you want some water? Oh. I was going to say it's not working. I lost train of thought now. Adult services, any questions we'll collect afterwards, pass through to that committee, which I think, if I'm flicking through all of this, takes us to, lost the pages in the list. Public health, sorry, I've got to flick past that. Public health on 108. Actually, it's not, it's 106, 107. Yeah. Any questions you have on that, we'll pass back through. Oh, I'm sorry, Caroline.
Thank you. On page 109, they talk about having another meeting in November. I just wondered what the outcome of the meeting was. Page 109, actions to improve. They said a follow-up meeting scheduled for November 21st at 24th. I just wondered what. Thank you.
We'll take that away and make sure that the response to that, which I'm sure it would when it gets raised in the relevant ONS committee, that we'll have that response in there. Thank you.
I think that takes us to the end of the QOR. KPIs, sorry. Right, we're going to move on. Couple more sections to go. We've got one substantive item to get through yet, so I think if we can focus our questions, we're going to agenda item 52, which is a 6-monthly report on progress of the delivery plan on the transitional council plan. That's a mouthful that trips off the tongue. Louise, unless you have anything else, we'll go straight to questions. No, she's batting it to Stephen. Any advance?
Well, I will do what I do in these circumstances, say a few words and hand over to the people who've done the work. You will be aware that the council plan is going to be, the new council plan is going to be informed by our work, particularly on the community vision. but on other things that the council's engaged with, Marmot most notably, that we have a necessity to ensure that we keep the existing council plan in place to cover the gap between where we are and where we want to be with the new council plan. So this is really about a progress on the delivery of the transitional council plan. In other words, this bridging the gap version of the council plan, I think, is the best way of putting it, don't you, Louise? But I'll hand over to you to speak about.
Absolutely, Leader. So yeah, absolutely. So this is the first time you would have seen this set up. This is how we plan to bring our new council plan to fruition, with the delivery plan to demonstrate how we're actually delivering it year on year. So this is our first, as I say, outing, bringing this report, showing a 6-monthly review of 24-25. You will see from page, I think it's 125 in your agenda pack, is then the report that sets out as an appendix, which then goes through each of the themes of the council plan, setting out the outcomes, key results, progress against each of those. Now, just with regard to the covering report, it just gives you an overview of how we're doing. Of the 141 items, we've got 12 that are completed, 117 that are currently on track, and 12 that are delayed. There are explanations in each of the items demonstrating why there could be a delay or how it's being completed. As I say, it's just for the first half of the year. Obviously, things are progressing already from obviously when this report from that period from September. So there could be already updates that would be ready to come into this. And again, we'll be looking at timings of that as we go forward in the upcoming year. But I think, again, it's just asking if there are any particular questions from the committee.
Pauline.
Some of these milestones have got dates on them, most of them don't. Is there a plan somewhere that actually has dates on it? Because it doesn't actually mean very much if it says it's on track but it doesn't have a delivery date.
I will pick that up and make sure that we look at those going forward with regard to dates. There will be specific objectives sitting within service plans that will definitely have the dates that are attached. And it's perhaps just how we're starting to bring this sort of piece of work forward. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We would always look for dates and targets.
I think if we can also, if there's any other things that you'd like to see that are in this layout, I think pass them back through if this is something we're looking at for adopting for future measurement or tracking of the full council plan. I think rather than trying to go through that tonight, just pass them through on email back through. I think that'd probably be more useful. My only observation, and this is because I'm old, older than I'd like to be, some of it's quite hard to read.
Yes, it's quite small.
Well, you know, and these are fairly new, but I have to say, these are fairly new but slightly dirty glasses this evening. And actually, ironically, the printed version in this case is actually a little easier to read than the mod.gov version.
We had a lot to fit in, you see, for the chair.
Does anyone have, and I'm going to move on in the case of embarrassment, does anyone have any specific questions to ask on any of the topics on here?
Sorry, just a quick one on page 127. It's an increase of minibuses to provide transport. It's delayed. Is there a main block to why the schools are particularly keen on that one there?
I don't know. Is there a page of
providing safe and strong communities, first box, third line.
Chair, so it's I think in terms of prioritisation, it's where it's not about the schools being necessarily unwilling or challenging. Certainly, it's very difficult, I think, for schools in terms of the resources that would need to drive the bus and so on. What we've focused on with Hampton School Transport is where we can get the best out of the resources that we've got, focusing on making sure that our contracts with our providers are the best they can be, supporting individuals to get themselves to school, so that independent travel work, and a real kind of focus on that, working with our cross-council. Susan mentioned earlier on about projects that are really truly cross-council. This is exactly one of them, where the school's bus team, the bus team is working with the school's admissions team to make sure that we are aligned, doing the very best we can for residents. I think this is more about working our way through that prioritisation list rather than any difficult blockages or barriers. Thank you.
Any more questions? No. And we'll see the next version of this at the next meeting.
This one will be 6 months. So the next quarter for the key KPIs will be in March. This will be the 6 months. So this will be the end of March. So it will come in June, probably, with regard to the next update.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will make sure. Yeah, I will look at making sure we've got specific dates. There should be clear objectives specifically. Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
Right. We move on to the next item, which is probably the largest substantive item left on this. We're going to be looking at agenda item 53, which is the future office provision. Sarah, I'll give you a few seconds to move to a microphone. There's a couple of things I just want to say, and then we'll hand over. I think just waiting for Stephen intentionally to put a biscuit in his mouth. Susan, thank you very much. If you'd like to stay input, feel free. If not, go. Yeah, run. Yeah. Ria did that as well. Yeah. Quick. What I just want to say is, whilst the guys are getting set up, is obviously there's a lot of information in this. There was an all-member briefing last week, details of which are being shared. So we're not going to run through the entire presentation that was run to the all-member briefing. I'm going to hand over to other people to introduce this in a moment. But what I would just ask members, there's a lot of facts and figures and numbers in here. There's a lot of things around changes in status in terms of how does that score and those scoring matrices. What I don't want to do is go through that at this meeting. It's not the time and place to kind of go, should it be a 4, should it be a 5, should it be a tick, should it be a cross? That opportunity will come as it goes through. The main point I wanted to make was I just want to be careful that we don't verge into territory. This is a public meeting, that we don't verge into territory that would normally go into confidential or would impact our commercial manoeuvring space in the future, whichever path we eventually go through. And I think the other point, which will come out in this is this is going to the executive shortly. I think there will be some changes that certainly I think I'd like to make to some of the recommendations, which we'll pick up as we go through. And I'd also like to just make sure that Sarah picks up on the question that Stephen raised about keeping leasehold on the table. I think a couple of you mentioned that point to me. So I think if we could just make sure that's picked up. Once we've gone through this, I'd like to run through the recommendations that are going to the executive and then just focus on what changes we would like to suggest into this process before it goes to the executive. And I think I'm down to take this report recommendation, what we decide, to the executive, and then present the kind of the thinking of this committee to the executive when they discuss this item. I keep saying it soon. It's the 30th of January, I believe. 30th of January. Right, Stephen, do you want to go first?
Yes, please, if I may. First of all, thank you very much for those comments, Chair. I think Stephen Newton, who was here but isn't here now, I mean, he said 2 important things. The first was about recognising the importance of commercial sensitivity of some of the material in here, so trying to avoid getting into discussions about things that may end up causing the council some difficulties when it wants to negotiate with other parties. And the second point was he raised the point about wanting to see leasehold as still as a live option. I personally don't think that will be too problematic, because the purpose really of this report is is essentially just to try and be in the position where we don't have to keep all of our potentially usable assets in play and can't do anything with them. So it's not so much about what we choose. We're not making any choice through this executive report. We are trying to narrow the choice somewhat amongst the portfolio of properties that we hold. Adding leaseholding in as a remaining option, continuing to have that alongside the options of repurposing other buildings or refurbishing this place, it does not present us with a difficulty, because obviously we wouldn't be leasing one of our own properties to ourselves. So it does not cause that problem. So I think from the point of view of what I picked up from the all-member briefing and what Stephen, I'm pointing over there, that's what he was, what Stephen said at the beginning of the meeting, I don't think it will be an impossible task for us to accommodate that wish. And I think, just again to emphasise, what we're intending to do here is not yet make a decision, because it would be, I think, unwise and premature to make a decision in the context of not yet knowing enough about the timetable for changes to local government structure. I've expressed a view earlier on that I think it will take several years, but it would be helpful to get greater clarity on what that timetable is going to look like. I doubt if it's going to be very quick, but whether it's quick or slow, we just need a little bit more certainty on that before I think we make any kind of decision. So what we're asking for really is the ability to be able to narrow our choice sufficiently to free up some of our assets to be repurposed or even disposed of for the benefit of the council and our residents, rather than having to keep everything in play for potentially quite a long time. So if we narrow the options down, and as I've indicated, I don't think there'll be a big problem in including leasehold in those range of options. We're not planning to do a lot of additional work between now and when we get greater clarity on the timetable for local government reorganisation or reform or restructuring. So we're not intending to commit significant amounts of money to furthering this project, although I do need to say that there will be necessarily some money we will have to spend on this building, because there isn't an option of saying do nothing, because there are some serious issues we will have to address with this building. Whether we stay here or don't stay here, we're going to have to spend some money on the building, because there are some costs that we cannot avoid. We will have to spend money on the building. That's, I think, all I want to say. So, and just a final word, perhaps, on process. I think it would be excellent, Mark, if you came to executive and reported on what your committee decides it wants to make as its recommendations. I can't guarantee we'll accede to all of your requests, but we will certainly listen, and there'll be a chance to engage with you on the thinking behind that. Obviously, I'm here as well, so I'm listening. It's not as though I'm going to be completely ignorant of the thinking behind it, but it would be useful to have that iterative process. And it will, if we can get this right, be a good example of scrutiny working as it should do, adding value to the decisions that we make as an executive. And I think that's one of the great virtues of bringing these reports to you in advance of their coming to the executive. So you have an input at an early enough stage to actually influence the outcome, rather than, as we have had in the past, a kind of confrontational position where executive decides and then scrutiny calls in. And a call in is inevitably a much more confrontational process. And doing it the way we're doing it, I think, is bringing benefits to everyone. It's giving you as individual committee members an opportunity to have a real and meaningful input, but it's giving us as an executive the chance to benefit in a less confrontational environment. So I think we want to encourage that process, and we've successfully done it with things like home to school transport appeals process, which we looked at through children's services, and then we had a report from the then chair of children's services coming to executive to make recommendations, and I'd like to follow that model in this instance. So it'd be really good if you were able to come up. We'll even do our best to arrange the agenda so that you don't have to sit around all evening before we get to you.
That's very good.
If there could be some reciprocity on that, I'd be
Pauline, you had a
great
question. Is it something that's likely to get picked up in the report, or is it section? Okay, that's fine. Jahid, same thing. We'll go through the report and then hopefully questions will be answered. If not, we'll go around questions. Sarah, thank you for the and Graham.
Delegating upwards.
You're delegating upwards. I like that. I like that, Louise.
It's not like devolution, which is turning out to be migration of powers upwards, not down.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I won't get involved in that discussion. In some ways, repetition, but this is a huge, on one level, this is a huge decision, the future HQ for this borough council. And from a financial perspective, and obviously a service delivery perspective, how we do our business, the impact on the residents, services we provide, the staff working effectively from it, and of course, yourselves as councillors, a valuable, important asset of how you do your business. So on the one hand, it's huge. On the other hand, it's really important to remember this is not the decision that determines what it is and we start spending on it. And I think it's worth saying, because this is a public meeting, this paper is not about deciding this is the asset and we're going to start spending. This is simply a filtering down. In the context of Stephen's absolutely right, knowing 40 years ahead was never an easy job. It's now become so much harder with the recent policy, but it was incumbent on us to do something because this asset has been sweated. It's kind of time expired now, and we'll start racking up very significant costs as we go forward. So we have to do something. We started this work quite a long time ago. Even when we started that work, we knew this property had been, well, not maybe consciously neglected in terms of not putting money up, spending abortive money, let's put it this way. So we've kind of limped on quite a long time to this point. So it's, as Stephen says, we can't do it an awful much longer. The key reasons for bringing this paper here is picking up that story of we need to do something about the next 40 years. And that agreement, executive told us to get on and do some work, so we need to report back. But the other thing goes to that very point of making best use of all our assets. And we've felt quite strongly that to start utilising some of our key assets and filling them up long term would maybe would reduce our options for potential HQ. So to actually narrow down will be vital for us to then say, right, we now know we can do something else, or we've got long term certainty of other assets. So the sweating the asset portfolio will be enabled by saying, right, we are now distilled to these few as opposed to the many. I would say surprisingly, from a financial perspective, what I thought was going to be quite a critical financial decision, of course, the figures are big, not for 1 minute suggesting they're not, but they're incredibly close when you look at when you put everything in the round, all the capital receipts, the capital expenditure, the revenue impact, the lost revenue, it's incredibly close given the level of potential flux. There's so much unknown into any of these contracts and what the contingency level we'd need, what actual rental we would get from the marketplace at the time we went to the market. Given the amount of potential fluidity there, I think these figures are incredibly close when looked at as best like for like annualized version of how it would look in the revenue accounts. So quite bizarrely, I'm saying to you, as CFO, let's say, I don't think if we recognise we have to spend money and obviously wisely and at the right time make the right decisions, the actual choices are incredibly close enough that I would say I'm not strongly advising any from a financial perspective, which then means actually the primary consideration becomes its use. It's the purpose that it will serve in terms of delivering all we need to do. Obviously, in the context of the more we know, the clearer we are about our business and what we are as a council, the better. So I'll say no more, other than, of course, we listened very closely to the questions that you raised for those that attended the informal or council session. We answered some questions directly at the time in full. We answered some partially and some maybe you'd consider not very well at all. We deliberately haven't gone and said, here's all the questions you've asked and here's our answers, because you may have reflected on them. You may be happy with the answer you got. You may have your question may have moved in terms of what's important to you. So we deliberately haven't gone, this is what you said and now is our response. But we have, of course, prepared around some of the key themes of inquiry and proposals that were put forward. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Graham.
I'm not.
You're not going to say anything?
I'm not saying.
Okay, fair enough. Colleagues, I got Pauline first, then I got Shahid, then I got Andrew. If I've missed anyone, just let me know. Pauline, over to you first.
Thank you. I'm not going to replay all the argument at all the arguments made at the previous briefing, but it was very useful. Thank you. I've got some concerns about the levelness of the playing field between the different options. I completely agree with Stephen Newton, which isn't unusual actually. I think it's very sensible to keep that leasehold option in. I think we shouldn't be quite so specific as to say it has to be leasehold. There might be things you want to play around in that spec, but basically it's new building of some sort in a new location, whether it's leased or whatever it is. I think especially given the current uncertainty in local government, which Stephen alluded to, it would be a bit dangerous to do something else other than that in the short term until we know where we're going. I also don't like the way the evaluations have been done, and I don't agree with the way some of the things have been weighted, but that's beside the point. So I agree with Stephen. I'd like to leave that leasehold one in. With that recommendation, I think you're going to end up actually possibly with option B, which isn't not what is in the recommendation. You're recommending option A or option C. If we add option D, I think, which is the E, which is the leasehold, you might well end up in the short term in option B, because as you said, there's some things you have to do to this building now regardless. So I think really probably the recommendation is going to come down to drop option D and release that one and leave the rest on the table, because I think you might end up in B rather than A, at least in the short term. And as I say, I'd like to get into more detail into how you've weighted some of the things, particularly the MTFP impact. I can't see C, D and E all being rated at 5. They've got different financial impacts quite significantly. So, and there's other things about the fitness for purpose of option C as well, which I'm worried about. But on the basis that we're only talking about what we drop, and we're talking about dropping option D, then I think that's probably reasonable. Would that help? It's a sort of shorthand for what was discussed last time.
I think just also adding to it, I think I'm quite keen that within the option B that exists, sorry, not option B. Recommendation 2 is quite specific and structured. It's either this or it's this, and I think I'm quite keen that either we reword that. What I don't want to do is, how can I put this? I don't want to hamstrung officers in their deliberations. We know what we are trying to achieve in the short term, but I think we just need to amend that. So what we're not going is in 9 months' time, Pauline, for example, if something comes up and you go, actually, that's a more logical solution, we can't then go, well, that wasn't what the report says.
I think what I was trying to do is turn the recommendation the other way around.
Yes.
So instead of saying do this and this, saying don't do this. And then it leaves you free to scrub the option D and do something else with those buildings without forcing you down one of the other routes.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing, in different angle. Yeah, I'd agree. I've got, do you want to take the questions and then answer them on block, or do you want to take them as we go?
There was a question.
I'm not sure there was.
No.
I just thought I'd say it.
Apart from maybe how do we feed into your evaluation of the evaluation criteria so we can actually give our view on how we think you've measured it, which is not published in here. It's a lot more detail, I think.
Sorry, I was going to come in on something else, and if it gives you a few seconds to think about your answer. I think the issue around shoot end MVP and shoot end refurb is about timing. So if we're going to make an ultimate decision, we've got to. That's right. So I don't disagree with you. If you're counting the short term, medium term, long term, then of course shoot end MVP is in there, but in a slightly different way. It's just put your sticking plaster on that presents itself, as opposed to a more planned approach, which of course is often the least cost effective. But I take your point, but just want to stress shoot end that version of B will be a short term till we know more type thing.
Sarah, does that give you enough? You're frantically scribbling away.
No, that's fine. I think it's interesting because having gone through the process of the evaluation, so we started with the technical team, then we went out to technical property officers who hadn't been involved in the project to get their sort of view. Then we went through CLT, then we've been through some of the politicians, and we've tried to encapsulate and sort of almost do the average, but there was a lot of differing views around the table, particularly I would say around risk and delivery, and that's sort of people's appetite to risk and how comfortable do they feel. So I just wonder going forward, when we get to a point again in the future when we're looking at options, and I don't know if I'm straying out of my lane here, but whether there's a way of being able to facilitate that type of conversation across the board with councillors, those who, I don't know whether it's a working group, capital W, capital G, I don't know what that is, but something that allows people to go into that detail, because we were in sort of a dark room with no windows for quite a long time working this through, and whether that is a way forward potentially.
I think that I don't think you're straying outside your lane at all. I think that's an extremely good suggestion, and it would be a way of both providing an opportunity for more engagement on those details about scoring and assessment and weighting. But it also, it's very clear that there are quite a few councillors with some expertise here that it would be useful to bring on board. So I would feel quite comfortable with that, but we do need, just to go back to the central point here, this is simply about deciding, and I think Pauline actually put it quite well, deciding what not to do, not what to do. We're not in the position where we can possibly decide what to do for the reasons everyone's very familiar with now. So we just need to avoid a situation where we're leaving bits that we might be able to use productively. And we want to try and avoid that. That's the fundamental objective of this report, is to avoid getting ourselves in the position where we have assets that are being wasted because we can't make a decision as to what we do with them, whether we include them in or not.
Thank you for that. Shahid, then Andrew.
A couple of points. I think Pauline has made one or two points already, but I think I totally agree. This is not the right time to make it this year. What Stephen you said, and because there's so many uncertainties at the moment in terms of how things are going to play out. But one thing, I was at the presentation the other day as well, mentioning about lease. I did not see an option there of actually leasing any commercial properties out there. There's a lot of offices building, for example, available, which could be exploited, for example, but that wasn't actually covered in the presentation, if I remember correctly.
So I think the things have moved on.
Options.
I think that's why we're saying add back in or not remove the leasehold option.
That particular point was the buildings which we have, right? What I'm saying is outside what we have as well.
No. Specifically,
I think that's what we meant by the
specifically add
leasehold
back
option.
in external leasehold. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's fine. But also, I'm just thinking, in terms of the feasibility, and obviously what's been happening, we had a budget, I think it was £170,000. In terms of the spend, are we actually within the budget, or are we spend more than what was allocated? I'm just be useful to know where we are with that. Ability of this work, which I'm talking about. Understand? Yeah.
So back in September 2023, Executive approved a supplementary estimate of £175,000 for the additional feasibility work for financial year 23-24. Obviously, the work has taken more than that time. So we also had budget already identified for this current financial year. So we did spend the 175,000 that was approved, and then we have gone into some of the feasibility budget that had already been approved for the HQ project in the MTFP. So we have spent just over the 175, but as Stephen said, at this point now, we are subject to the decision of Executive. Our technical teams are putting their pens down. Our programme manager will be stood down whilst we wait for that certainty. So there won't be any further spend on that.
Is it possible to know how much was allocated for this year? Approximately?
Off the top of my head, no, but I can find that one out. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Adrian. No, sorry, Andrew. Sorry. It's late and there's a whole draft blowing. There is just an Arctic blast coming out.
Just stop heating the building, that's why.
Yeah. Everyone looks at Graham. Andrew.
Yeah, I was just going to raise, again, some of my concerns a little bit about not getting into the sort of nitty-gritty of the scoring system, but I think partly from the discussion which has been added today, just looking at the summary of the scores, we'd initially sort of in the report said, right, we're going to go with what ranked number 1 and number 3, because we discounted number 2 because we felt that the project objectives was too important and that scored lower, which again brings into questions about weightings, I think, which Pauline mentioned. So, which is fair enough if we value that highly enough to take that out of the mix. But now we're also discussing leasehold and saying we should keep that in the mix. So we're potentially getting into a stage where we've done all of this scoring, but as a result of the scoring, we're deciding to go with option 1, 3, and 5 out of 5, which makes me beg the question, if we're considering those 3, when it goes to Executive, do they essentially need to ignore all the scoring because we've made decision based on none of the scoring? And then the next, I guess, leading on from that, well, yeah, that's my and I guess my sort of recommendation along that is, if we do go with that, and I don't have a particular problem, particularly with the top 2 that we've chosen. I hadn't given as much thought to the leasehold, to be honest, because I wasn't thinking about it. But yeah, it's essentially that those scorings are sort of taking out the question if we're thinking about them. But then I know the scorings are such a huge part of the document that I don't know how much that affects what we're discussing.
I just come back. Obviously, we are bringing this report to you for your views, and we get the sense that leasehold is something you would like to retain as an option. That certainly came out of the all-member briefing on the subject. And it was clearly what Stephen Newton wanted us to include. I've given an indication that wouldn't be an impossibility from our point of view, because the primary objective is to work out what we can release from this process and use for other purposes. That's the primary objective from my point of view at this stage. And we're not planning to do very much more work on this at all until we just have greater clarity on where the landscape lies. The figures that have been produced on the basis of a really, these things, one can disagree with the scoring. That's perfectly understandable. People have different perspectives. They'll attach different weights. But this is what our professional officers, looking at this over a very long period of time, have come up with. And we have to respect those figures. They've been produced by people who have put a lot of effort into it. So, but notwithstanding that, if there is a desire, and I sense there is, to retain the leasehold option as a possibility, that one we wouldn't rule out using, I'm quite happy to listen to that, and I've heard the arguments in favour of it, and I think I don't think my executive colleagues will find it impossible to accept that, because it doesn't in any way undermine the purpose of the report coming to the executive. It's perfectly compatible with that purpose. I think what would be difficult is if you were recommending we keep all options open. We continue to consider all of these as possibilities, then that would undermine the fundamental objective of the report, which is to enable us to identify what we can not proceed with, so we can repurpose it or even if we had to dispose of it. So it gives us that option. And again, always bearing in mind, we are in an extremely volatile position at the moment. We just really don't know with any certainty the timing or the certainty of any changes. I mean, we've used occasionally the words greater certainty. I think I doubt if we're going to have greater certainty for a very long time. Perhaps more clarity would be the most we can hope for. At the moment, we haven't really got that. So I would hope you would endorse the idea that we don't make any premature decisions at this stage. But, I suppose what I came in to say was that we will listen, and Mark will act as your ambassador in presenting these recommendations to us, and we will listen and consider. I can't guarantee we'll accept all of them, but we will do our best to accommodate your recommendations if we can do so without impairing the purpose of the report. And I think from what I've heard, we can do that.
Andrew, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think, and I accept all those points, and I know a lot of effort has gone into coming with these scorings. I guess where it goes to the executive, I'm just wondering whether sort of urge the executive really to recognise that there is a degree of subjectivity, I guess, with some of these, and potential kind of, I don't want to say margin of error because it sounds like there's mistake, but sort of a margin of different sort of opinions where people have made decisions on weighting, which I know we've talked about, to the extent where we're saying, okay, particularly with options A and C, yes, there's 4 points difference between them, but just viewing it as that not necessarily one starting ahead with the other, but actually viewing them as possibly quite similar with those, bearing in mind that those scorings aren't going to be absolute and things like that.
I think you're absolutely right, and everybody accepts there's a degree of subjectivity to all of these scorings, and that will apply to all members of the committee making their own assessments. There will be a degree of subjectivity involved in that. It's how you weight different things. What we've tried to do, our officers have tried to do, is give a fully rounded picture that takes account of a whole range of different considerations, not just the financial considerations. Those are not the only considerations that matter here. There are matters to do with the extent to which you might be able to support the local retail economy. There are matters that are absolutely vital about public access. Those are all really significant issues that have to be weighed in the scales alongside the financials. So it is a really challenging task to come to a position where you can adjudicate between these with absolute confidence. And as Graham said, just looking at the options we've got, many of them are remarkably close. And I think we all accept that. But I hope we can just be in the position where we agree what we can at this stage rule out, which I think we are kind of feeling our way towards agreeing. And then that helps us to be able to make use of that asset in the best way we can for the benefit of our residents. And at the same time, if we can agree that we are not making a decision, it would be foolish in the extreme to make a decision at this moment, given that all of the levels of uncertainty about the future. So when we have a little more clarity, who knows when that'll be, a year, maybe too soon, but maybe not. We'll find out. We can't commit ourselves to a time, but when we have more clarity, we'll be in a better position to move forward. But we don't intend to spend money progressing any option until that greater clarity emerges. But we have to spend some money on this building, and you just need to remember that.
Pauline and George.
I think I don't know if were you at the council briefing? Okay, so there was quite an interesting discussion there, and it wasn't a binary discussion, and a lot of the discussion wasn't just about how you weight things. It was about the assumptions made behind these scores, and I found quite a few things Adrian said I agreed with. People come to different conclusions depending on what assumptions they made to get to those scores, and I think because of that, you can end up with quite a different view of different options. So it was actually a very good discussion. It was a very interesting discussion, and there was quite a good chat going on chat as well. But it isn't just about how important you think something is. It's also about what assumptions you make to get to the answer that you had on the score in the first place.
George.
Thanks. I think firstly, I agree with getting rid of D. I'm going to sort of start with that. Removing the Ruber buildings makes sense. I just wanted to make a couple of points around, when this comes back at some point, around this even playing field. And this isn't around the scoring. This is around evaluating the buildings. One of those things is the capital receipts. So I think coming back, whenever that may well be, it would be great to understand the way you're valuing those based on today's value or some other potential maximal value, and ensuring that A or C or E or whatever is the same across those two things. And then the other item I just wanted to mention again, when we see this again, it's around anything that we're evaluating, having an absolute minimum specification of the building. Not to go into detail, but that was a lot of the chat on our briefing on Monday, last Monday, was around will this fit here, will that fit there? And I think we want to know, when we haven't this come to us, be yes, not maybe, might fit it here. This is our minimum specification and it fits within this building or that building or another. The last point I wanted to make was around around option E. I don't think I certainly don't have any problem with us evaluating not just leasehold, but any building outside of our current estate for freehold or leasehold. If there was an opportunity to buy a building within the borough and it made sense financially, I don't see why we should tie ourselves down now or through executive to not be able to do that. I haven't got a hard opinion on it. I just don't want us today to recommend not looking at everything else. So actually, just last thing on the question, as far as are there any other assets within our portfolio today that you are keeping an eye on or holding with this in mind, or is it just effectively Ruber, Peach Street and Shoot End that you've got in hand now that you're evaluating? So if we recommend today to remove D, is there anything you're doing in the background that you go, well, actually, we're keeping hold of this thing here and we're just thinking about it, question mark?
Stands our asset portfolio.
Well, there was quite a few questions there, so I'll just kind of.
Do you want a minute to think? We can ask.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So I'm happy to drop you an email of my thoughts as well.
That's
but
fine.
Yeah.
So just on the capital receipts, the values in the appraisal are valuations that were done in January 2023, and they are based on residential land value. So what could we get if that site was sold and residential could be built on it? And we had a discussion in the member briefing about how much that is a hope value or how much that's reality. And some of the sites are more inclined or more policy compliant for residential development than others. For example, here has a draft allocation in the local plan for residential development. So the principle is established. Rubric 1 and 2, for example, has an employment designation in the local plan. So by default, you would, if you were completely policy compliant, you'd be saying no to residential development, which obviously impacts its value. So it's a January 2023 date of residential, and that's taken into account in the value of the capital receipt that's put in there. Happy to go into more detail, but just as a summary. In terms of the specification of the building, I've tried to set out in the report what that specification at this point is, and that is one of the things is around capacity. And obviously it talks in the report about further work that we want to do about understanding our workforce capacity requirements going forward, if there was any changes in the way the organisation works. And the building designs at this moment have been done to stage 1 of REBA, so they are relatively, they give enough confidence that we can fit those things in, but they are not detailed to the point where somebody could say, this is my desk, this is where I'm going to sit. That all takes time, and that takes money, and when you have this number of options as well, you times it by 5. So we've tried to do a level of design that's appropriate for this stage of the process to give us confidence that these things can be provided, but not designing it into the absolute detail. The question about could it be acquisition? Absolutely, yes, it could. And when we appointed Page Harley Harris to do our search for us, and part of their brief was acquisition options as well. Now, at the time that they did their search, which was spring last year, there wasn't a suitable building for sale at that time that met our brief, which is why it's not in the report. Now, if it would be helpful, I could add into the report that we asked them to look at acquisition, and acquisition could be an option, and that would be subject to its own financial, obviously, appraisal. So I could put that in. And your last question about are there any other assets that we're holding on to? The answer to that is no. We went through our entire, based on the specification, and the key, I suppose, things there are size of the property and accessibility, and by that I mean both by public transport and parking. The parking requirements for a HQ are quite substantial and quite nuanced about when they're available and who they're for, and balancing public and staff and councillors and all sorts of things. And we went through our entire property portfolio, including those that were tenanted now, that had somebody, and these were the options that we came up with, that were the ones that met the brief. So no, I don't have anything in my back pocket, I'm afraid, that might answer the question.
That's the answer I wanted, actually, because the recommendation you're saying that what you're asking here is to say only look at a couple of options, which meant everything else got put away. But if we're only going to take out D, trying to ensure we're not sort of tying you up with something else.
Portfolio is the smaller retail, commercial, industrial units. That's really where our portfolio is focused. We don't have this is our biggest kind of office employment floor space we've got.
Thank you.
Something really, which I hope would offer some further reassurance. You were suggesting when this came back, what things might look like. I'm hoping that what comes back will have been shaped by the working group we've talked about, that they will have an input before we have another look at it at a forum like this. So I'm hoping we're going to be able to involve people who have a a particular interest in wanting to have a say in this in a constructive way. That was suggested, I think, out of something that Sarah said. And I think it's a good idea, and I think it's something I'm quite comfortable to go with. So if that were, it's not for me to decide, but if that were to emerge as one of your recommendations, I don't think that would be one that we would find impossible as an executive to live with. Far from it.
Just before I go to, sorry, George, was that just before I go to Adrian? Can I just, we're throwing around terms in here about removing option D, and just wanted to be careful in some of our choice of language that we actually have tenants in some of that building, and that in the discussions that we're making today, it doesn't necessarily or suddenly mean that they're going to get turfed out tomorrow or the building sales signs go up. This being a public meeting, I just want to be really clear that for the purposes of this, it doesn't mean by removing it that suddenly they're going to get eviction notices or kicked out tomorrow. It doesn't. It just means that that process of looking at what we want to do with those buildings can start. I just want to be really clear that anyone listening in doesn't suddenly pick up or panic that that's going to, yeah. Adrian.
Yeah, we had an example right near the start of the discussion from Susan describing the choice to buy a freehold dementia care home instead of having to build one, which would have been massively more expensive. So we've made a very, very astute financial decision, and it's a purpose-built care home which we're going to update, which is going to cost us a huge amount of money less than building a brand new one. So I think that that was an extremely good decision by this council. And further to George's point and Sarah's acknowledgement that at the time we do look at freehold, and Sarah's confirmed that, which is also good. Thank you very much.
Caroline. Try and wrap this up.
Thank you. I've no problem with leasehold or freehold, but my main problem, I think it needs to be near to the town centre as possible, because if you talk about inclusivity, not everybody can drive. So when you're looking at the properties, can you try and make sure they're into the town centre as possible?
I think it's, we obviously don't want to constrain ourselves at this point too much, but I think obviously when we come to assess, when we move on to the final decision-making stage, we would be having to assess a whole range of considerations, as we were saying earlier on. And, you know, accessibility to the public will be clearly a very important one. But we're not really at that point. We're really just thinking about how we keep options open, but at the same time close off some options to enable us to use some of our assets to best possible use.
I missed out Andrew, so I'm going to go to Andrew first with apologies.
That's fine. Just a couple of quick questions about some of the options. I just wanted to wonder, and I'm sorry if it was addressed in the briefing. I looked through the notes, I couldn't make it, but Peach Street, the option is the idea that Peach Street could be used for housing, because obviously the idea is if this isn't used, it could be used for housing. Is the idea that the Peach Streets, is there any chance the Peach Street site could be used for housing, given that it's looking like it would be a rebuild anyway? Is that an option at all?
So yeah, the question was raised. So the Peach Street site is a very difficult site. It's very constrained and it's very long and narrow. So from the frontage of Peach Street back, and if you don't want to impact on the car park provision, for example, and reduce the number of spaces, it is a very difficult site, and it's particularly difficult for residential where you need the requirements for light to come in. We acquired the site in 2017. And we have looked at a number of options for developing that, which actually included a planning application that came in 2020 that was subsequently withdrawn. That was for a commercial mixed-use development of gym, retail and some office. We have had a number of residential schemes drawn up behind the scenes that have never made it into the public domain because we are really struggling to find a viable way of providing a residential scheme because of the constraints of the site that doesn't negatively impact either on the parking provision, enables us to provide enough parking, meets our affordable housing. So the the Peach Street site is probably sort of the difficult child that we don't know what to do with. And that is why, in terms of sort of the supporting town centre regeneration objective, the sites that aren't Peach Street, there is a negative impact in that scoring, because it still leaves us with what do we do with the Peach Street site? I know there are questions and ideas and thoughts about how could residential be taken forward there, which I'm happy to sort of talk with people offline. I think the other thing that is that site, it hasn't been on the market, but we have had some commercial interest in it over the years. They have all been for town centre commercial units. None of them offer residential. Nobody has come to us and said, I'm interested in this, but I'm happy to go into that detail. But it's a very difficult site, and the question mark is what could we do with it? Yeah.
And sorry, my other second question was a little bit about parking, which I think was raised. That talked about parking and accessibility being a really important point with it. Obviously, if Shoot End, if we go with the Peach Street site, for example, if this area is redeveloped, presumably it will lose all the parking spaces in here, but we're not set, I don't understand, to gain any in, say, Rose Street in East Hampstead Park. And has there been a sort of assessment based on if all the council staff need to park, or residents need to go to Rose Street or East Hampstead Park? Is that going to be viable?
I think the danger is, Andrew, we're morphing into a discussion about options that we might choose, whereas we're actually presenting this to you as not making a choice at this stage. And that, those kind of issues you're raising now will be very important, but we're not in the position to pursue them at this stage. And it would be foolish, I think, to narrow ourselves down at this point. So I think that's for another day. At this stage, as I said, this is about what we're ruling out, not what we're ruling in.
I think if I could just give some reassurance, a bit like the building design going to a level of design, we have done a desktop analysis and worked with our car parking team to understand the car parking implications, and effectively the flip, in particular of staff, you would see from Carnival multi-storey, where the majority of our staff do park if they don't have a permit to park out here, to East Hampstead Road East, and how that would look in capacity. We've got 30-minute parking bays out here for members of the public. And how that would work with Rose Street. So I just want to give some reassurance that due diligence has been done to make sure it's not a complete non-starter. But again, there's a lot of views and a lot of detail that we could go into at the right time on parking.
Thank you. Pauline, and then I think we'll try and bring this together.
Could I just remind everybody that there is at least 3, maybe 4 town centres in the borough, and that the important thing about this site is it's accessible to residents, including residents that have to use public transport, not that it's in a particular town centre.
Okay. Any other, Alison, do you have a?
Well, yeah, because point 6, to support town centre regeneration, it's just referring to Wokingham, and I didn't quite understand why supporting Wokingham, which, we've been prioritising Wokingham town centre since 2010, and still not looked at our other town centres, why that was considered such an essential point for points. And throughout the report, it constantly refers to the town centre. As Pauline said, we have other town centres.
I think I'd also like to add to that as well. I think I agree. I think I'd also like to see, as we're looking now that we have the benefits perhaps of more time, about looking at service design and service delivery for the future, is actually how we can use more sort of, I'll call it hub and spoke, and how we can put more of our service delivery, call it shop front, call it whatever that functional facility is. We've had the benefits of more time, and I'd like to see how more of that hub and spoke, outreach, shop front, whatever you want to call it, is actually placed out into all of the different areas, and so that it's not, this is the largest proportion of people, but we have to also make sure that we're serving all the residents. And I think that's why I'd like to try and see that figured in, whether it's a recommendation, whether it's a principle.
I think you're knocking at a completely open door on that, Mark, because that's precisely the route we're wanting to follow. And all of this would be associated with the establishment of effectively hubs, satellite offices, whatever you want to call them, in all of the major centres, and including one of the new centres. we're going to be starting off with Arborfield. So that intention is there, and that in a way runs alongside whatever work we do on NHQ. We've got to ensure that we have a more decentered approach as well.
Alison, do you want to add anything to that? So unless there's any other questions, I'm a little conscious of the time, and I'm also a little conscious of the fact that I don't want some of our officers to get pneumonia sitting in this. You should feel the draft over here. It's quite serious. It's oh, it's lovely over there. I think we should swap round here. Yeah,
dare I say, Chairman, this is living proof of the need to spend money on the building.
Feel free to wear a coat. I've got mine. I might put mine on. Right, unless there's anything else. It's seriously, it's freezing over this side. This is a rather large coat. Right, so can I just pull members' attention to the recommendations? I'm just going to go through them one by one. So I think first recommendation, I think we're okay with. Does anyone have any issues with that first one? Consider the finding. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at page 140, but yeah. Sorry, it's the cover report starts 139. Thank you, George. And then the draft recommendations to executive are that the executive consider the findings and outcome for the latest stage of feasibility work undertaken on the council's future office provision, including the financial impact. Are we? No, Pauline?
Well, maybe we could add the bit that Stephen was talking about in there somewhere about having a workshop to do a bit more work on the evaluation.
I was gonna add that as a working group piece and then include that. But I'm fine for it to go in there. But item 3, recommendation 3, and I'm skipping 2 for the minute. Recommendation 3, which is about agree that Woking Borough Council own assets considered not suitable and therefore no longer blah blah blah. Are we okay with the wording of that? Why
aren't we being specific and just say take the rather than shimming around WBC own assets considered not suitable? Why not just say consider that we take out Rubric 1 and 2?
Back, if I may say, to the comment you made earlier, Mark, about not wanting to unduly alarm existing tenants.
I think it will. It's better than leaving it in, because if you leave it in, it's saying we're going to take it over and build on it. Whilst if you take it out, we're not. Because this thing's in the public domain anyway, isn't it? So.
Okay. So we think some changes could be made in there, potentially. Is that what you're saying? Either remove it or I'm not sure I particularly want to list them in there, but I'm not sure. I'm not wedded to anything for that. I'm just seeking views.
I just don't see the point in trying to obfuscate which WBC own asset that you're talking about in item 3, where further on in the paper it tells you.
Fair point. Come back with the recommendations. I'll work on revising it and come back. The 4 is about just updates and outcomes will be reported back to executive in due course. I think somewhere in the executive early draft it says about September or autumn 25. I think that will need to be amended, but I think that the in due course piece comes back on 4. So I think it's just then is Andrew.
So I just want to briefly ask when does the because this is coming to the executive, is it next month or the month?
30th.
So yeah. So and is a decision being made at that executive or
no? The only decision being made is to approve this report, which is essentially not to make a decision, but to narrow the options.
Okay,
so we're not planning to make
a decision. When's the plan for a decision to be?
Well,
we don't know.
That is the whole point.
Can we just have one?
We want greater clarity. We want greater clarity on the timetable for local government reorganisation or restructuring before we make a commitment in any direction. So all we're doing at this stage is saying we're going to keep this process going. We're not going to invest more time and money in it until we've got greater clarity. But we do want, in the meantime, to be able to use an asset or assets that have currently been included in this process, but we no longer want to include. Okay. So that's the purpose. That's what executive will be asked to approve. Plus, they'll be considering whatever recommendations you as a committee make.
That's fine. I was worried that it was going to be a
don't
final
worry,
decision.
It's not going to be a final decision for goodness knows how long.
Just very quickly, right? I think when we actually look at the options, one of the options should be not to make any decision, right? That would have been much more simpler in a way, right? And that's exactly what we're doing at the moment. We're not making any.
So with all, I don't think we can
do nothing. Do nothing. Basically.
Hang on. No, hang on. But hang on. We literally can't have a do nothing option because we need to do something here, if nothing else, to fix the heating.
Could I suggest we change option? Could I suggest we changed option 3 to say to de-scope Rubra 1 and 2 from future consideration? And then that's simple. It's clear and it isn't threatening either.
No, can I seek some, just as we draft this up into proper words, which I'll share around to I'll get shared around to everybody and we can formulate that just to make sure there are no. Yeah. And then I think option 2, I'm doing this out of order, but option 2 is where I think we'll probably want to make a few more changes. One, that we don't think the executive should be tying themselves up in 2 distinct options whilst everything else is still in play and in flux. That I think we need to make some revisions to that to free that to happen and to include the leasehold option back in there or freehold. And I think the benefit of time, I think that the whole thing is the benefit of time gives those options to come into play. So we'll just need Sarah to, we'll just need to work on some of those options just to make sure that's backed in for leasehold and freehold, but effectively just ruling out Rubra. And the other one is to ask the executive to consider establish a working group, TOR, etc., membership, etc., format, etc., to be determined if it's approved, if the executive agree. If I missed anything else, sorry, it's been a long meeting and a rambling conversation. Caroline.
Like you mentioned earlier on about Mark joining or.
No, because I think to be fair, that's an output from.
I know, but do we need to make it formal?
No.
Okay, that's what I just want to check.
You can't invite him. We can invite him, but he can't invite himself.
We not even stop you there.
Well, if you want to be like that, I won't come. It's fine. No, sorry, have I missed anything else? Yeah, it's Caroline.
Should then it be the chair, Catherine?
No,
because it's
the acting chair, who has listened to all the debate and presided over it, because that means that the vice chair is able to with the authority of having been present.
Thank you. I just wanted to
road.
clarify it. Thank you.
Yes, that's a road to hell. We don't want to open up the carnage that would cause of having to then rebrief and do everything. Have I missed anything else off? Okay, so given that there's been a lot of pieces, can I suggest that we get that written up and shared round to the committee? Feel free to give feedback so we can get it formulated in the right way. And then obviously there's a time constraint because that's the 30th of January. So I'll follow up with you tomorrow. And then we'll agree that via email and then go from there. I think it's been a very, very useful debate and hopefully the executive will listen to the recommendations that we put in. Thank you very much. Might add a recommendation 6 that says fix the heating tonight. Noted, thank you. I normally do. I am 3.5 stone lighter. Right, we're gonna move on in the interest of time. So thank you for all of the input on that. Sarah, can I just say thank you and Graham, but thank you, Sarah, mostly for all of the excellent work that's been done on that report so far, all of the work that's been pulled together, for all of the listening to be done.
There's lots of people behind me. So.
And pass those thanks through, but also thank you for the excellent presentation that you gave to members last week and for all of those involved in the process. It's truly appreciated. I might buy you a cup of coffee from the vending machine outside. Right, we're going to move on. If I can just pull us all back. I'm just going to pull us all back. Folks, we still have agenda items to get through, so just pulling us back in. We have the next item is the consideration of the current executive and IEMD forward programme on pages 197 to 208. Does anyone have any comments or views on that programme? Yeah. So 97, 90, oh God, 197, 198. Some are coming, I recognise, for CCOS next week. Which, just as a plug for anyone else that's on CCOS, that's likely to be a fairly busy meeting. What
happened to the column that showed whether they'd been to scrutiny or not and which meeting they went to? So that was accepted and yes, it was implemented last meeting.
It's my fault, Councillor Swaddle. Due to Christmas and the holidays, we just didn't get around to doing it, but normal service will be resumed for the next meeting.
Yes, sorry, 199, I think we were up to, into 200. Fair point. We'll make sure that's picked up at CCOS. I'd like to get through the rest of this. Page 200. A lot. All right, I'll buy you a free cup of coffee. I'll buy you a cup of coffee for the vending machine. 200, 201, and then finally 202. Members of CCOS will recognise there's quite a few items that are coming up in the next meeting or two for CCOS, including next week, looking around the room. So there's nothing else on that one. We'll move on to the IEMD forward programme, just on page 205 and 206. Any comments or thoughts? Actually, I have all happened. Yep. Yep. So we're looking back on them rather than looking forward.
I don't think they did. I don't think they did the IEMD on right to buy because I complained because there wasn't a report on one of them, and I think it was that one.
I think you're right.
And they changed the date.
Can we get the that updated in the previous one with the revised dates on it? Yep. Thank you for the update. Draft work programs on page 210 onwards, starting with overview and scrutiny management committee, the next meeting of 4th of Feb. Damn right. 12th of all wear thermals and a jumper. I'm hoping by February it might not be as cold. Yeah. Moving on. 4th of February, 12th of March, 19th of March, 25th of February on 213. I think there might be some printing errors in here as well. And also, I've forgotten that I've neglected that on my printed version, the table header is in the wrong page. So climate emergency overview and scrutiny is listed on page 212, but the details on page 213. Anything else? Any of these items? CCOS? Gone.
Might be a bit late to scrutinise winter highways maintenance on the 20th of January 2025. Seeing as half the winter we've gone by then. Well,
No, this is the.
was it for 2026?
I think this is the forward program of the rest of the year. I don't think this is just the look back, but.
Which it's either rather early or rather late.
I have an email. I will forward that round. I can't remember what it said, but I know I've asked that question.
If we're looking at next year's highways maintenance, it would sorry.
It's too early for next year.
Page 214. If we're looking at next year's procedures for winter highways maintenance, then we should do that after this winter's over, so we can get learning from the whole of this winter. If we're looking at this winter, it's a bit late.
Can I find the email, because I went through this at the briefing. I have made similar comments. I haven't read that item of the agenda. When it comes out, it will obviously be read to an nth degree by everybody. But there's logic behind it, and I'll forward the email around to everyone. I was beginning to question my insanity at that point.
We published today, so it's on the website now.
Yes, go and have a look at the website. It's on there. It's another pack to read. I have an email as I asked the same question. Sorry, George, what was that? Yeah, lots of bedtime reading. I'm just determined to get this through because I don't want to have to do an extension. Anything else on any of the other items on here? It's a good way of saying, is there anything else anyone wants to discuss? And then finally, 3 minutes. Agenda item 56 is the action tracker. Does anyone have any items to discuss on that? I'm not sure there's enough in here to go through. 219, 220. Was that yes, you have a question? No, 221 and finally 222. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Going for a third time. Done. Meeting closed at 10:25. Thank you very much.